Today is February 17th. This is the Energy and Environment Committee. Thank you all for attending. If there are members of the public who would like to testify on item 1, please feel free to fill out a speaker card. They're located in the back of the room, and bring them over to one of our sergeants or to our clerk, and we will make sure that we have your input in this hearing. I would like to go ahead and invite our board president, Mr. Mel Levine, and our general manager to come on up. I know that they are going to be kicking off this presentation, but before we begin, I think I'm going to go ahead and very much limit my comments to just thank you to everybody that's participating in this process. It is a very, very involved, delicate, complex process, and it's taken the better part, I think, for staff, certainly a year or so, but for all of those of us who are reading the reports, trying to keep up, doing the analysis alongside with the research that's been provided by the Ratepayer Advocate, there's been a significant amount of time invested by many, many people. So for that, I am very, very grateful. It's been a very good education on this rate case, and hopefully we'll get to a place that we can move something forward that makes sense for the ratepayer and certainly for the utility. So with that, Ms. Edwards and Commission President Levine, come on up. Now, as you're coming up, I don't know, Mr. Blumenfield, if you had any comments, or Mr. O'Farrell?
Good. Yeah, I'll save mine till after the presentation.
Okay, very good. I think we'll get into it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will make very brief comments and then lateral the ball to our extraordinarily capable general manager. We have more than sufficient representation here from a number of our DWP leaders, so I'm going to defer to our general manager and them after my very brief comments. First of all, Mr. Chairman and members, thank you very much for holding this hearing and for your diligence and thoughtfulness in taking the time and making the effort that you have in digging so deeply into the detailed issues that you correctly articulated are complicated and extensive. And I know the effort and time you're putting into it, and we're very grateful to you for that. By coincidence, I just drove from somewhere near one of your districts, having spoken to the Government Affairs Committee of VICA, where I had a lovely lunch, and they just endorsed the water and power rate increase. So I thought, in case you hadn't heard that yet, I'd mention that to you. And by doing that, they've joined a very extensive cross-section of both the business and environmental communities here in Southern California who've expressed their support. The Central Cities Association, who I know is represented here, the Chamber of Commerce, the LA Business Council, and a whole group of environmental groups have encouraged the council to support the proposed water and power rate increase. I know today is water only. Look, from a personal and professional perspective, in a different context, I have sat where you three are sitting right now. Over the years, either in Sacramento or in Washington, I've been asked to make judgments about a variety of fees, levies, taxes, rates, and I'm very sympathetic to the situation in which you find yourself. I know firsthand that no political elected official is anxious to have to make a determination on a request for anything that costs money. It's a tough call. And I don't envy you having, you're now the people in that seat, and you've got to make that decision. For what it's worth, my own perspective, having looked at this now extensively myself for a period of months, is that the risk to the ratepayer is really greater if this proposed rate increase is rejected than if the proposed rate increase is approved. You all vividly recall, I'm sure, the pipe burst at UCLA that made so much news and flooded Poly Pavilion and so much of the attendant community. That was an extreme example of what happens with the aging infrastructure when it isn't kept up to date. But it's only an extreme example of what happens every single day, as I'm sure the three of you know. Yesterday, a significant pipe burst downtown. At least I am told 3 times a day, and I'm aware of the fact that it's virtually every day at least, some part of LA gets flooded by burst pipes as a result of the aging infrastructure. And the water increase proposal is really designed to do 2 things. 75% of it is designed to repair an aging infrastructure. General Manager and the others can get into the details as to why it's so important and the age of the pipes and the necessity of repairing them. But the bottom line is our infrastructure is aging to a frightening degree, and if we don't attend to it, what we have been seeing happen daily will continue and get worse. The other 25% of the proposed rate increase for water has to do with critical drought-related issues. Fortunately, we've had some rain, but that amount of rain isn't going to be enough to put a serious dent in the drought, and as a result of the exigencies of the drought, it's critical that we become much less dependent on imported water. The water that we purchase from the MWD costs vastly more than the water available from the aqueduct when it is available from the aqueduct. And in light of the drought, it's even possible that the reliability of water from the MWD may not be available. So it's critical that we do everything we can with regard to recycling, with regard to stormwater capture, with regard to a variety of drought measures that are required by the drought. That's where this money is going to go. It's going to go 75% for infrastructure, 25% for urgent drought reduction and water independence activities. So I am here really to lead off the testimony and urge you to approve this rate increase.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. Marcy Edwards, DWP. As many of you know, I've been a utility manager for a long time, and when I have brought rate recommendations forward, I have found myself frequently in the role of being the customer advocate against a long-standing bureaucracy who loves to build projects for a living. So as such, what we are recommending today is the result of a lot of work focused not simply on the utilities needs, but the customer's needs as well. I think our recommendation is a good balance between meeting mandates, hardening our local water supply, avoiding rate shock to customers, protecting the low-income population, meeting legal requirements, improving customer service, and very importantly, beginning to invest in our deteriorating infrastructure. And after having done what I thought was a good job in minimizing the needed rates, I then got to experience the ratepayer advocate system. For the benefit of the public, the RPA is an independent arm of the city. It was put in place by a vote of the people to opine on DWP processes, costs, and of course on rates. Ultimately, at the ratepayer advocate's insistence, we ended up further reducing rates by almost 1%, creating a use it or lose it mechanism that stops the collection of rates if DWP is not spending them as intended. And we are initiating a performance-based rate-making process. The latter is just simply a series of metrics within which DWP intends to operate that are transparent and indicative of our progress. This is subject, obviously, to further expansion and refinement, of course, and just represents a step in the right direction. With respect to our rate recommendations, you heard from the chair, a number of our supporters. The board itself voted unanimously to support rates. The ratepayer advocate ultimately determined our rate request to be just and reasonable. The ratepayer advocate's independent consultant, Navigate, is in support of our proposal. We provided over 70 public presentations, over 300,000 views of our internet-based rate videos, over 250,000 views on our rates information website during 7 months of extensive outreach. And while I am very clear, no one likes rate increases. We believe the increases we are proposing are prudent, will help to forestall higher costs, particularly if we violate legal mandates or continue to allow our infrastructure to age without repair or replacement. We are also appreciative of the chair's efforts in particular to begin the conversation on reform, which will better assist DWP in serving its customers, particularly in the areas of personnel management and procurement, but rates should not wait for those conversations to conclude. We also understand that there are recommendations that will or have been made to this committee and full council regarding the city transfer and utility users tax. But I would again ask you to allow the rates recommendations to move forward expeditiously and not hold it up while these other critical topics are explored. And with that, I will invite staff to the table to initiate the presentation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Come on up, Jeff. And whomever else.
Thank you. Where's Neil? Oh, there you go.
So colleagues, as sort of staff's getting settled in, what we'll do here is have the department make a presentation. They've been joined by Dr. Pickle, our ratepayer advocate. And as you all will recall, Navigant was contracted to do the rate review of the case, and they are, where's Andrew?
They're here.
Okay, there's Andrew. At some point, we'll invite Navigant to come up and give us their presentation on the scrub that they did on the water rate case. All of this, colleagues, is to say that today we will be hearing the water case, and then we will hear the electric case at some point. Jeff.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm going to go through a presentation. A lot of these presentations, the materials are from what we've done over the last 9 months. We've gone through stakeholder input. Marcy talked about the 70 meetings, and I'll get to that specifically. The three main things that this rate request is for is to replace the aging infrastructure, protect us from drought, transform supply, meet mandates, and that's both water and power. And then improve our customer service and keep our rates competitive. That's very important to us. We do a lot of work to ensure that we can keep our costs as low as possible and make sure that we are competitive with the regional utilities around. Go to the next one. So this is our 70-plus presentations. It actually may be closer to 80 now. We've done this since July. You can see the different locations. That actually only shows 57, so it's grown at least probably about 15 since that time as well. And in red down the bottom is what Marcy talked about. We've had 384,000 views of our video. We have a series of 3 2-minute videos, one for both water and power, one water-specific, one power-specific. We use those as part of our presentations. And we've had 236,000 website views as well. So we've had a lot of input. It was an excellent use of technology, I think more than I've ever seen before as we went through to get stakeholder input. The next one, what were the common questions and concerns? You can see the poor guy doing the presentation. I'm on number 52, I believe, right now. Replacing and fixing aging infrastructure. Our stakeholders get it. Everybody gets it. They look at, we've had some examples, and we'll show the examples, although I did learn 2 weeks ago, I won't go into my UCLA jokes, that everybody knows we need to replace and fix our aging infrastructure. The financial relationship with the city, that's transfer UUT, Marcy touched on that, and then protecting LA against the drought. We have to do that. And we also have to make sure that we protect our most vulnerable populations, our low income and lifeline, and I think that will work in conjunction with our conservation-based rates. And then lastly, creating jobs and boosting the economy, especially at the meeting we have here that was in South LA. There's a lot of people that want to we're going to create a lot of economic activity with this rate request. We're going to be bonding, and we'll be having a lot of jobs that will come out from that will really help Los Angeles, and I'll get to some of the specifics on that. Next is Dr. Pickle and his office. We have been meeting with them extensively since July of 2013. They've reviewed everything, the financial plans, the major capital projects, the marginal cost study, various rate design options. Every 2 weeks we have a pretty full agenda that we've been working on. We prepared 230 financial sensitivity cases. So we did a lot of work to look at what is the right answer for our customers. The official case that we're going to talk about today on the water is number 94. So that just gives you an idea how many different reviews we had on that. On the power side, which we'll get to in the future, it's case number 143. So we've done a lot of work And I think we had to start the renumbering over, too, because it went over multiple fiscal years. We worked diligently with Navigant to improve the accountability, transparency, and again, that's performance-based rate making and an interim rate review, which I'll get to the specifics on that. So the next page is the summary of the changes that we've had. The performance-based rate making, so we've got new metrics. We have 49 different metrics that are both water and power that will go to our board, will come to E&E, will really hold DWP's feet to the fire to ensure that we are meeting all of the metrics and all of the goals that we talk about in this rate action. Net wholesale revenue and contribution in native construction. Councilmember, I know as part of the discussions that you were having, that actually is going to save our customers. That's responsible for saving our customers quite a bit of money. In the past, any extra amount that we would get in those areas, we would use to fund capital projects, cash fund capital projects. Now what we're going to do is give it right back to our customers. And again, we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks with the power review. The interim rate review, so that's essentially a mini rate review that we're going to have. We're going to have to do a number of things, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. We've had lower fuel prices, power access charge, and as Marcy talked about, all these different things that we've had is about a 0.9% per year drop. So the rates, as we've gone through the stakeholder input, have actually lowered. Next page, performance-based rate making. So again, we talked about this, 49 different metrics. We're going to have to come to the board, to the ratepayer advocate, to the Energy and Environment Committee, to this committee to review the performance on these metrics and also talk about our mitigation plans. If we're outside of the variance, we're going to have a plan and say this is the plan that we're going to do to come within that variance, and you will get to opine. Dr. Pickle will be looking at that on a quarterly basis, and every 6 months we'll be going to the board and E&E to go over what those plans are.
It's also important to note that the parameters aren't set in stone.
Right.
That these are only our initial bandwidths, and as we gain more experience, the hope is that they will substantially shrink. But this is a place to start.
Right. And there was a lot of negotiation that went on back and forth to get us just to what Marcy's talking about. It's a new thing for DWP that was, quite honestly, not envisioned at the beginning of the rate process. The interim rate review, as I said, this is a mini rate review. We're going to have to come back with a revised 5-year financial and performance outlook. We're going to have to look at what the base rate revenue targets are based on those updated costs. Whatever changes between now and then, we have a new MOU, we have new work processes, all these different things that could happen. We're going to have to look at what those costs are. Dr. Pickle and his staff and whatever consultants he have will look at what those targets are and will, again, hold our feet to the fire to make sure that we have backup and support for whatever those targets are going to be going forward. Any responses, any mayor or city council reports that are requested as part of this rate action, similar to what we went over 2 weeks ago, Neil went over, we'll also have that as part of the action in the mini rate review. The next page is competitive rates. So again, you look at this chart. We've shown this chart. It's never really reported that our rates are lower. Sometimes I've even heard people use a ledge. Our rates are lower than most every city. Sacramento is certainly lower than us. They have lots of low-cost hydro. But as you can see here, and this shows there are rate increases, and any rate increases that we know of, you can see that we're very competitive with other cities. Santa Barbara up on top, that's the opening of a desal plant, which is something we want to avoid, and that's what the local water supply is all about, and we'll talk about that in a minute. On page 8, and this is, again, as Marcy talked about, this is a combined water and power. That's what we've went through today. We are only really talking about the water, but just as a view of what's going to happen with our customers. So the low-use residential, that's our best 30% of the customers. I used to say bottom 30%, but it's our best 30%. The customers that use the 30% that use the least amount of energy, and their bill is going to go up about 2.4% per year for the 5 years. So their bill goes from what is right now $75, $74.97, to about $84. So it's going to go up basically about $10 at the end of the 5 years on a monthly basis. The typical residential, that's our 50 percentile, goes from $130, 131 to 151, it's going up about $20. That's about a 3% increase. And then the 90 percentile, so that is the customers using the top 10% of power, will go from 276 to 357, so it's about 5.3%. That is the conservation-based rate making, where the more energy you use, the higher the price is, and you can actually see that in the increases here. And there are lots of programs we'll talk about, we talked about today in City Council, that can mitigate a lot of these impacts, not only for residential customers, but as well as commercial. On the next page is commercial. This is indicative, and I won't go through each one of these, but as you can see, it's roughly a 3 to 3.5% increase. We've run several hundred estimates specific to various customers. So any of the different customers, when we've gone to Central City Association, LA Chamber, all those different organizations, we would run for those customers specific. Here's what you had last year. Here's what your bill will be going forward for the 5 years. And it's I don't have the specific numbers, but I know it's several hundred estimates. Go to the next one. So how can customers save? And I'll start in the upper left. This is what we discussed today, air condition and tune-up program. So this is where we're going to have, free of cost, we're going to go out and do a tune-up for our customers. Now this is something that most people don't think. I started off life as an engineer, and I will admit, after we've looked at this, I haven't done a tune-up in about 10 years, so I'm going to get one, because especially my rates are much higher because I live in Edison territory. This is something that will help our customers to probably avoid the overall rate increase, because it avoids the higher consumption at the higher tiers in the summertime. Councilmember Blumenfield really drove us to this, and I think this just shows a good way that not only does everybody win financially, but environmentally as well. Pool pump rebates, $1,000, that pays back in about a year and a half. And then water conservation. We have a number of water conservation between commercial rebates, technical assistance, education, and outreach on that. Next page is where we talked about the economic benefit. I won't go through each one, but the water, you can see, we believe, and this is again an estimate, that we will create 9,000 private sector jobs on top of DWP jobs. This is 9,000 jobs that create significant opportunities in the LA area. And these are construction type jobs. They're very well paying jobs. And in total, it'll be roughly 21,000 jobs. So these are good jobs that will be done in the LA area. When you're replacing pipe in the LA area, all those different things, as well as on the power side, it's something that will create a lot of economic activity. The next page is just a nice picture of Newhall Pass from the top of Newhall Pass. And this is what our commissioner president spoke of, is 78% of our water revenues, and you can see down the bottom the water infrastructure, that plus the water quality, which is also infrastructure, pipes, all the things that are going to assure that we meet the regulatory requirements for water quality. That's most of what the breakdown is on the water portion of the rate increase. On the left-hand side is the local water supply. If you add up between water conservation, water recycling, groundwater, and stormwater, it's about 11%. That's our local water supply. That's something that would have served us very well if we had these investments made decades ago, would have served us well in this drought. And that's something that will serve us well going forward in the drought, where we can take all of the rainfall that falls in the Los Angeles area, essentially store it in the San Fernando Valley, and use it to serve our customers. The other two items are just the LA Aqueduct improvements, and then the Owens Valley, which is really a regulatory requirement as well, and we'll talk about that specific on the costs. On the next page is, again, an esteemed university that had the break in the pipe, and this is just indicative of what's going to happen overall. You have where work is done on an emergency basis, you can see in red there, it'll cost roughly 3 times what it'll cost us to do on a planned basis. Infrastructure, when infrastructure breaks, you have instances like this that are high profile. There's other examples out there when infrastructure breaks, it's high profile. This is something we have to do, and the engineers at DWP, working in conjunction with our field forces, are going to go out and replace these pipes so we don't have these issues, and it's going to save money.
It's also important to note that a lot of construction took place in the LA area in the 1920s. There was a real boom. So we have a real bubble of piping that was installed in that same time frame that's hitting the 100-year mark. And so the concern is, given the methodologies, the construction techniques, the materials that were in place at the time, we're expecting a much higher failure rate, and we want to get ahead of that bubble if we can.
And remember, there's another example of this a couple of years before, and Marty Adams could go through the details on Coldwater Canyon, very similar, on the other side of the hill where we had a pipe in the trunk line break there. We had significant damage. On the next page is just showing the difference between where we are today, which is on the left-hand side, and that's the 4-year average from 2010 to 2014. And you can see on the left-hand side is MWD. 53% of our water came from the Metropolitan Water District, 34, about a third, came from our LA Aqueduct, and the groundwater is 12%, recycle is 1%. As we move forward, what we're trying to do is to shrink down that MWD by half. And you can see there that MWD, where it was 53%, now goes to 24%. The aqueduct stays about the same. But what causes that MWD to go down is on the, really, if you look at it from about 4 o'clock to about 8 o'clock on this pie chart, from stormwater capture, conservation, recycled, and groundwater, that's adding 24%. That's our local water supply. That's what's going to make us more resilient to droughts similar to what we've experienced in the last couple of years. The next page is the spending. The infrastructure replacement goes from 306 up to 711, more than double. Supply transition, which is again the local water supply, goes from 134 to 382 million. Water quality stays about the same because we've had a lot of projects over the last year to comply with the federal drinking water standards. And Owens Valley goes from 103 per year to 209. A portion of that is to save water as well. What we're doing on Owens Lake will hopefully reduce the amount of water we have to put on the lake, which will then allow us to use that for our customers. And one thing, again, to look at this going back to the economic activity, roughly 95% of this additional spending, so what we were spending to what we're going to be spending, is going to contracts and outside vendors. So there's going to be a lot of economic activity coming from that. Get a little bit into the details on the rates. So if you look on the left-hand side, in the early 90s, DWP was really on the forefront with tiered rates, and that had 2 tiers. So a lot of utilities now have gone to 5 and even 6 tiers. So what we think is the best is to go to 4 tiers. Now, we also have to comply with the San Juan Capistrano case, and that's what we've done on this, is on the right-hand side is our water supply. So this isn't getting the water, not the distribution or any of that, but it's just simply where we get our water. So if you look at the percentage, Tier 1, basic use, that's 8 HCF per customer. That's enough, I think it's 200 gallons per day for roughly $1.18, something like that. That's going to be 68% of our total consumption of water. So where is that going to get fed from, right? That's the most basic use, the highest priority. So that's going to get fed from our LA Aqueduct, 53%, and then to make up to 68%, we'll have 15% will come from groundwater. And if you look on the right-hand side, that's just indicative of what the price is. What this ordinance will do will make us every 6 months look at what the price is going to be for the next year and say, okay, how much is that LA Aqueduct going to cost? So if we get a really good El Nino, if March really comes up right now, it's kind of okay, but if all of a sudden you had a really big El Nino and the water supply doubled, that LA Aqueduct would move up, further up, and it would also cost less because the costs are relatively fixed for the LA Aqueduct.
Jeff, just on this, I think it's important to note, this is what a regular water year looks like.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
When's the last time we had a regular water year?
I'm going to look to...
What, 5 years ago?
It's been about 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years. So this is assuming that everything were sort of going the way that it used to in the good old days. But when I look at the LA Aqueduct number, for example, I understand that we have, and Marty could probably tell us more about this, we have a lot of this in storage. But we took very, very little in deliveries from the LA Aqueduct. This 26% here, MWD, I mean, if we looked at it from a purchase perspective, it was
much higher,
almost 90%.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Right.
So this rate case is predicated on what a normal water year looks like.
No question.
And notwithstanding, I think the good work here, we're hearing and seeing, and in this committee most recently, Dr. Alex Hall at UCLA, go Bruins, came here to present to us not too long ago that they're noticing, at least as they're studying the environment, that we're getting hotter, right? And so everything indicates that we are having hotter years than the previous year. The new normal is a very hot California. How is that? How do you sort of true up this page in particular with what the new normal is?
I think one of the things to be considered is this is a sliding scale, but it's based on the cost to create and provide the water. At the end of the day, we're a not-for-profit agency. We don't have a dividend we can pull money out of. We have to allocate the costs for supply and delivery across the customer base and do so in a way that reflects cost of service as well as cost of supply. So while in fact this is based on a water year, a regular water year, it still works under a hot water year. One of the things Felicia Marcus mentioned to me, it's on one of the regional water quality, thank you very much, is she was asked the question, what is the average amount of rainfall in Los Angeles? And 14 inches. Okay, well, what's the average amount of rainfall this year? Still 14 inches. These are hundreds of years, and there is a lot of flex in the science. But this is, I think, built to be responsive under that kind of a system.
No, clearly you need experience in order to be able to sort of say what normal is. My point is that it doesn't seem like it's getting any cooler. Our arithmetic is based on what we're accustomed to being regular water years. And our snowpack last year, I remember we were at 4% of normal.
We're at
this
97
year,
now.
97 until we get to April 1st, we'll know what we actually really indeed have. But it's hotter than it's been. I'm just suggesting here that this is a little bit rosy colored in terms of sort of cost.
That's fair.
And I think that we should start figuring out, maybe as an action item in the future, and we'll put a pin in this, how it is that you true up this and you look at segmenting what normal is versus what we've been experiencing. Because if we're anywhere near where Australia is or was, with the millennium drought, it never got cooler. It just got hotter. And all the evidence seems to indicate that the new normal is upon us, but we're predicating this rate case on past experience, which is fair, but I don't think it's absolutely, I think it's too optimistic.
I think a range is probably appropriate, though it did start raining like heck in Australia once they built a desal plant.
They did. But in Perth, it still stays drier than it does anywhere else in the country, and they still have to rely on it.
They've adopted conservation-related techniques, behavioral adjustments that we hope our structure will also help motivate people to take those actions that they can.
Okay.
But the lowest cost water, whatever it is allocated to this sector, and that's the only takeaway really on this slide.
Okay.
Right, Councilmember, that's just the one thing. In the short term, it's based on what the actual costs are. We're just using this as a forecast, which I think your point goes to. We need to look at our forecast to make sure it makes
Supply
sense.
ranges, yeah.
But the actual, what the supply is, so going back to what you said this year, that LA Aqueduct would be way far down the bottom, and then we'd have a lot more MWD. That's the way the ordinance is written, is to look at what the actual supplies will be going forward. So the costs will change, the volumes will change, all of that will change, and that's something we work very hard with Dr. Pickle, his staff, and Navigant to come up with that. So.
And to that point, the groundwater hopefully is also going to be changing in the larger direction with
Right.
the bond money and all the rest. You know, my hope is that 18% is going to go much higher.
Right.
Mine as well.
And along with the reality that the MWD portion and that will go higher and the aqueduct will go lower.
No, I think that's a really good point. But, you know, in order to get up and running after, if we get the $371 million from the state in requested Prop 1 funds, by the time we get the basin repaired, it'll be after this rate case. So my only point is that it's a little rosy colored, sort of how it is. And I think that's going to be important when we get into sort of what the performance metrics look like. But I'll let you continue here.
Okay, and so then on the consumption side, on the left-hand side, again, Tier 2, which would be 20% roughly of the total, is enough for drought-tolerant landscape. To the extent anybody certainly under the current conditions can keep a lawn, that's going to be Tier 3, which is going to be roughly 8% of the total. And then Tier 4, which is the highest use, is 4% of the total. So that's above and beyond what you need for a lawn. All of this is based on the science. I won't get into the detail, but science that takes into account the time of year, the temperature zone. We have 3 different temperature zones in the water, and the size of the lot that a customer has. So it sets up a water budget. What is the right amount of water for each customer? If they have drought-tolerant landscape and use it correctly, they should not go out of Tier 2. And one thing we don't have in here is 55% of our customers will never get out of Tier 1 or Tier 2, and only 9% of our customers see that top Tier 4. Page 18 is just a picture that shows the structure. And again, this goes a little bit to the legal discussion that we have. If you look at the base rate's the same across the bottom. The pass-through factors through the middle, that's everything but the water supply pass-through, will be the same as well. But you'll see that the water supply cost, which we just went over, will go up and go down based on what the actual water supply costs are. And then there's also a peak pumping and storage component, which was based on a water system engineering study that we've looked at. Customers using that highest tier and the third tier, they require us to put in more assets for the peak pumping and the storage component. So that's how we get to those rates. It's obviously a lot more complex than this, but it's just trying to show how that structure is. And it is something that's going to be a lot better, even in our 2-tier system we have now, where it's got some pass-throughs that are in, some pass-throughs that are out. All that's going away. This is something that's going to be relatively consistent. And then our last slide that we'll go through, this is our timeline, obviously subject to change, but you can see we started in January and June going, and that was June of 2015. We presented to our board on July, I think it was July 7th, July 8th, somewhere in there, July 7th or July 8th. We've been out talking to all different stakeholders since that time. We've gone through, we've had and Dr. Pickle will get into more of the detail on the reports that have come back from his office and from his consultants. Here we are today, the water rates going February 17th. Obviously, the best case scenario would be the February 24th. We've discussed that may not happen, and we're hopeful that the new rates would go into effect on April 1st. And that's something, again, that we have to look at. We just have to manage our cash levels as we go forward as to when these rates will come in. One of the things we do have to do is go out to the bond market. Once we get these rates in, the way we're funding all this is from bond markets. I think we have somewhere in the order of about $1.5 billion between water and power. We're going to probably have to have 2 separate issues for each one. And so that's one of the things we have to keep in mind is just our cash levels as we move forward to stay within our financial metrics that we talked about 2 weeks ago. And with that, I guess whatever the next step or question.
Okay, well, before we get to the ratepayer advocate, let me just begin by saying that I'm sharing observations. There's a lot, I think, in here that's very, very good about some of the things that we need to look at. I would prefer a stronger governance model so that we wouldn't have to rely on some of the things that we've come up with, like the performance metrics and the bands of tolerance. And there's a lot in here, though, that given sort of the existing situation, I think is very good. But what I'm a little confounded by is a couple of things. But let me start with the one that is sort of the most obvious to me. So I've replayed the commission hearings to make sure that I didn't miss something. I sat through a couple of the presentations in the community. I've not seen once in my notes or in reviewing all of that again where it is that we talk about the additional 2% rate. So if you look at your draft ordinance on page 43 in your draft ordinance, and I don't know which version this is. I think it's the most recent that you have. And if you look at, I guess it's section, on page 42, it begins with additional reporting, interim rate review. You speak to the financials, the performance metrics, the forecasting, the market, and then you get to page 43, and in the second paragraph, where it says, additionally, after receipt of the results of the interim rate review from the Department and the Office of Public Accountability, if any of the revised base rate revenue targets calculated for fiscal year 18-19 and fiscal year 19-20 as part of the interim rate review, which I think we need to talk a little bit about,
Okay.
from the respective base rate revenue target stated in this ordinance, the Board and Water and Power Commissioners shall by resolution take further action to choose to increase or decrease the respective base rate revenue target stated in this ordinance to any degree not to exceed 2%. So understanding that this is built on a regular water year, if we were to pass this ordinance as it's currently drafted, and we don't make the performance metrics, it's hotter than it expected, we don't have the supply, then the board has the ability to increase the rate package by 2%. Water, power, both, one or the other?
So this is only about the base rates. This specific area is only about the base rates. So as far as water supply costs, that's going to be coming to our board every 6 months.
And those are pass-throughs?
Those are pass-throughs, right?
So I understand that sort
Right.
of being natural. but
Right.
This
So-
ability to move the base rate by
Right.
2%.
Right.
After this rate action, so is it really a 5% case, a 7% case now? I mean,
So this is, again, where we talked about the mini rate review. So at that time, we have to come back with a brand-new 5-year financial plan and say, here's what our financial plan is moving forward. And this was something that was developed right at the end of the rate action. We were working, again, with Dr. Pickle on some of this, as well as Navigant. We come with that rate review, we look at it, and the board has to make an action. If everything stays the same as the forecast is right now, there'll be no different rate action from what it is, but the board still has to make a specific determination to say, we think the rates should stay the way they are for base rates.
right, so let me just be a devil's advocate
Sure.
here. So if everything stayed the way it was,
Correct.
assuming that we had a regular water year, then we'd be fine. The rates would be what you presented to the community and to the board. They'd
So,
be,
council member, yeah, this is, again, if the water year itself will be on the pass-through, this is only for base rates, which on the water side, it ends up like 35%, I think, is what the total amount. So when you say 2%, it's 2% of 35%. So it'll be something like, less than 1% would be the overall impact of that.
so they go up by how much?
It could go up or down by 2% of 35%, which means somewhere around 0.6%, something like that.
So that would, so it can go up or down, maybe 0.6%.
Based on what the actual financial plan is, because again, we have to comply with Proposition 218, and that's something that Dr. Pickle's office would be heavily involved. When I say a mini rate review, similar to everything we went through for this, where they have looked in and opined and say, yes, your revenue requirement lines up with what we see here. This is just that allows the board, if it changes a little bit, they can make that adjustment. It's obviously subject to Section 245. The council could choose to review that as well.
Well, but I guess that's where I get a little confused. So,
Okay.
so let's say so things change and you change it by more than 0.5% one way or the other.
Okay.
And then it says here in the draft language here that the ratepayer advocate would have the ability to recommend that the Energy and Environment Committee review it after the board and have a committee hearing. We could 245, but we wouldn't be able to do anything about it, other than passing a new ordinance to replace this one. I mean, separate and aside from having a committee meeting, what power does the council or anybody else have for that matter to say we don't agree with the additional rate increase?
So, I mean, I can have Dr. Pickle talk more about it, but specifically the request was made that even if the board, they have to make a specific action. So with any action, if they, city council, as always, has the right under charter to review that action. So even if the board said we're going to leave it the same, that could be reviewed by city council, and it goes through the 245 process.
But
And as far as what they can do with it once it's 245, they can basically remand it back to the board. You can basically decline to accept it and turn it back to the board.
I guess, Marcy, where I have sort of challenges with that is when we're told that there's very little to no choice with this rate case, can we really realistically remand it back to the board?
I will again say it's a not-for-profit agency. This is a zero-sum game, and it's all about who's paying for it. We have spent the last number of years following council instructions, renegotiating contracts, creating efficiencies, doing benchmarking. We have done a tremendous amount of work internally to drive down our costs. But at the end of the day, you start to reach a point that the cuts and curtailments we're making are damaging. They're damaging to the agency, and they're damaging to our customers. So we're trying to create a system that has some predictability, that allows council to reach in and halt it if they are not comfortable. I think at some point, it's similar to, it was mid last year when the water rate action, our revenues were declining under fixed cost, and there's an automatic provision that allows the board to make an adjustment to ensure fixed costs are recovered. It kind of replicates that ability that's been within our rate making for a number of years.
I mean, I understand the ability to make an adjustment. So we do that with fuel costs, we do that with the water supply costs, but this is a rate increase in the middle of a previously authorized rate case that gets done by the commission and maybe comes to the council, maybe it doesn't. And I'm just wondering why, first of all, why we haven't talked about this other than I didn't see it presented at the board and I didn't see it at any of the community hearings. But I just wonder why not structure a case that tells me exactly what the percentage is versus having these sort of maybe situations where the board would then have the ability to increase, or it's written cleverly, decrease the rates. If you had this live today, and you look at the last couple of years, what would have happened? Would we have had increases in the last couple of years? Separate and aside from what was authorized? So if we took the 2012 case, overlaid this, and looked backwards, the board would have acted and moved this up 2%, the base rate.
There are two aspects to this. You're focused on the second paragraph. From, as ratepayer advocates, we suggested these two steps in conjunction with Navigant, and Navigant was very useful in helping us cast it into these paragraphs. I think the most important paragraph is that last couple lines on changes to the adjustment factors. As you notice, 2/3 of the rate is adjustment factors. And our concern in the utility business is there can be rapid changes in this business, and things can get out of alignment in a period of 3 years. The most important aspect is potential changes to the adjustment factors and how they are calculated and how they're set up. The adjustment factors did pretty well, but in some ways the adjustment factors for the existing ordinance were out of whack during the drought, in that the Tier 2 did not increase with increased water costs in the drought in the old system, and we would have recommended a change in that. So this gives it more, the first 3 lines on page 43 give an important aspect of how are we going to change the adjustment factors so that we're tracking the realities of the cost better. And that's why that covers the water supply, pass-through factors, and other components. The base rate is the one that's set to the 2% limit. There was a lot of discussion over the 2% limit and the increase or decrease. The decrease was a chance for the council to step in and declare victory in cases where the decrease might be more than 2%. The increase is to make sure an increase over that is fully vetted.
The increase will be run and cover, because I don't know that a council would want this back. Why don't we sort of segue into your presentation, Dr. Pickle?
Whenever you'd like.
Sure, please.
Leave his up too, because I may want to go back to that slide. I'm not sure you got that. There it goes. How'd you do that? Yeah. I'm going to walk through first the timeline. Our view of the timeline is a little bit longer in this process. Our review and opinion, both the process and the results. The challenge to perform that's been an issue, but also the need to step up infrastructure investment. Performance targets and rate adjustments, and the importance of this midterm review for additional pressure for productivity in the last 2 years of this cycle, and then the need for, or stepping up for increased transparency in things that people talk about and speculate on, but needed to be brought out into a public dialogue. And finally, a repeat of our recommendations. The last base rate increase was 2013 for power and 2009 for water. The last rate review was in 2012 for both water and power. The water proposal was withdrawn. We've had regular meetings with DWP on these rate issues since mid-2013. The rate proposal was put on hold by the general manager when she arrived with, as she noted, she was responding, hey, wait a minute, to some of the increases. There was an extended discussion on 3 versus 5 years in late 2014, and the start of the discussion of what would constitute an interim review and the trade-offs between concern about the difficulty of forecasting more than 3 years in the utility business. I can demonstrate the uncertainties in these markets by asking people, what's the first digit on oil prices today? Is it a 3, is it a 2, or is it a 1? And that's versus yesterday. The key component of this process is to revisit the adjustment mechanisms, as I mentioned, and I think the opportunity and the benefit for the ratepayers is having the semi-annual review of the statistics coming up to a 2 full fiscal year review when we can get to change these things to better reflect how they're tracking actual expenditures and actual performance. And I think the importance of having performance targets has multiple benefits for the ratepayers. In particular, DWP has to improve its productivity on a broad range of measures. The rate proposal was reinitiated in 2015, midsummer. Marcy was able to bring the power rate proposal down by at least 2%. The water rate proposal didn't have much room in it and didn't come down much, although I'm sure Marty would be willing to tell me how much was actually reduced in that process. The draft rates report by DWP was given to us in August. It was the ordinance in September. This was all updated in November to reflect the financial results in through the 14-15 fiscal year, and then we had additional discussions on these components and how rates could be changed or improved or reduced in late December 2015, and then we issued our power rate review in mid-January, our water rate review in mid-December, and the board acted on water in December and power in January. What are our recommendations? First, we believe the proposals as they stand right now are just and reasonable. I'll go into that in a little more detail, but we encourage the approval of these proposed rates and ordinance. Key to this is we need some improved labor metrics to be included with the performance measures. We want to get that in place as anticipated in the ordinance. In the semi-annual review cycle, we would like to issue that report to the DWP board by June 1. One of the key concerns we have is the largest division at DWP is the power division. The second largest division is the joint division. The third largest division is water. So an important component of this is paying attention to the joint costs. And for that purpose, Right now, the joint division budget is split between the water and power funds. We think that there should be interim stability for the joint division where they're able to manage their budget and have authority over their budget and responsibility within a budget year. Fourth, DWP should immediately proceed with a second phase of benchmarking and, to the extent practical, move forward on recommendations. And we would love to have some things that we would say are quick hits. And then finally, one thing that is not included in this rate case, but we think is important, is there haven't been any inflation adjustments to the low-income Lifeline or physician-assisted customer discounts. And we think within the limits of Prop 26, less in Prop 218, that it's possible. What do we say, or what do we mean when we say reasonableness? Three major components. Are the rates equitable to the many interests? We're the ratepayer advocates, so we have a favored interest, but it has to balance a whole range of interests. Are customer costs connected to the provision of service? That's driven by Prop 218 and 26. That is driving some changes in the rates and allocation. There's a mixture of good news and bad news depending on where you are, but it means that some of the commercial rates may be a little lower, and the Schedule F irrigation rate is higher because it was substantially subsidized. Third thing is, are the rates non-discriminatory? That's been a standard for rate regulation since the railroad regulation era of the late 1800s. That essential measure is equal, people pay equal amounts for equal types of service. And that's an essential component across the industry for over 100 years. How did our review work? We were assisted by a specialized national expert, Navigant. We've coordinated with DWP and staff on meetings. We have the rate report, the ordinance, and the financial plans that have been thoroughly reviewed and commented on and changed as we requested. And finally, to address the question of transparency, we have done a deep dive on the total compensation for labor and looking at productivity. We were assisted on the labor cost issues by Oliver Wyman, which is part of the Marsh McLennan Group in association with Mercer Management Consulting. It's also part of Marsh McLennan. So what's our end result? We believe, as modified in December, these rates are just and reasonable. What does that mean? Based on current water forecast, which is an average water year, it's a 4.7% overall increase in rates. That anticipates a 5.3% annual growth in revenues, reflecting a recovery of demand if we get into normal water years. The money, as DWP has sliced it, has been 83% on infrastructure and the remainder on other related mandates. We slice it slightly differently, saying capital project spending is the biggest factor. The second largest is operating and maintenance cost. Part of that's going into infrastructure, but we are going to have a labor negotiation next year that was a situation where there was no COLA for 3 out of the 4 years. I doubt that can be repeated in these coming negotiations. And third, there are substantial reductions being made to unfunded employee pension liability that will put us in a better shape in the long run, but it is required to be adjusted for now under current new rules. But this also means more pipeline replacements planned every year. But it's less than needed to truly catch up, and we think there will be a challenge in key staffing for project spending. The water side has been better at ramping up spending than the power side, but still we think it'll be a challenge. How do the increases look? Based on adjustments to the demand forecast for the different categories and water costs. The estimate for single-family home, low-use single-family homes, this is different than what your paper version you have in front of you, is 2% per year. For multifamily users that stay within the first tier, that's 2% a year. For higher water users, it's single-family homes, not those not those up in Tier 4. It's 6% per year. There are large but necessary increases for the public irrigation customers. And again, these projections are based on a return to a normal water year. This is how the two tiers look. The solid gray bar, vertical gray bar shows Tier 1 and Tier 2 going up. This is for single-family homes. As you can see, Tier 1 has an initial bump because we're still coming out of the drought, but the overall escalation rate over the current Tier 1 is very low. Tier 2 is slightly higher. Tiers 3 and then the fourth tier has a substantial escalation rate, reflecting the high cost of supplies in that tier. Taking off from my comments about not as much as they need, perhaps more than they can use, if spending is not able to achieve the targets in that third-year review, there has a possibility of reductions to future increases in rates because of DWP not being able to spend what was planned. So those rate mechanisms are in place, and really a give back portion of the rates is in those last 2 years. The metrics are going to be refined every 6 months as we go through this period. So this will be a moving target as we move forward. This will be, and the committee will receive those semi-annual reports and be able to comment on those.
So can you spend a moment on how that works? You say it's the last 2 years, and that would be as a result of the interim review study?
Correct.
Which would take place when?
It will take place after 2 full fiscal years. So
I guess what makes it a little funky for me is that this is a 5-year rate case, and we're calling April 1 through June 30th the 2016 year 1.
correct.
Which is not a full year, but.
Correct.
So is that a first fiscal year completion?
No. First full fiscal year is the end of 16-17. Second, 17-18. It takes about 6 months for DWP to finalize their financials on that prior year.
So in 19, we'll do the interim rate analysis?
In the first quarter of 19, we'll do the interim rate analysis.
And so by the end of 19, we'll have a sense of whether we're going to go up or down?
On April 1, we'll start the process for the rate change, the formal process before the board. We can change the base rate target for 1920. So customers can recapture in 2021 any adjustment to the base rate target made for 1920. And then we'll be able to make prospective adjustments to the rates in 2021. Have I lost count?
No,
My
you're right.
calendar?
When the case ends?
When the case ends.
Right.
But there can be prospective adjustments for 2021 and 21-22. In addition, starting in 21-22, the base rates, if there's no other rate case, will be adjusted by inflation less 2%. 2% is a implied productivity factor. It's a very ambitious productivity factor. If there's no other rate case, there'll be a lot of pressure on DWP to meet a 2% productivity factor. That's a tough standard. I think I heard Marcy gasp.
Sorry.
I didn't follow that. Explain that again.
We're not good as a city at starting rate reviews. If this case goes beyond 5 years, if these rates go beyond 5 years, the period after the end of the 5th year has an adjustment to the base rate target, the base rate component of inflation up less 2%, which is a productivity measure. So they have to beat inflation -2. There's a floor of 0% on that.
It's an incentive to start the rate case.
It's a big incentive to
Huge
start the rate
incentive,
case.
but it's also-
It's an incentive to spend the money.
It's,
Well, and there's that for the productivity, but in terms of the actual give back, realistically speaking, it's the tail end of the 5-year case. So
Yes.
I'm not optimistic. I think that it's probably maybe 1 year's worth of potential give back by the time we sort of get up and running.
and it's entirely possible DWP may submit an entirely new rate case at the end of that third year.
Right.
You're saying because when you do the rate case, you'll build in the give back? Is that the issue?
Well,
Or
I
is that the
think
assumption?
there's a
I mean,
possibility, yeah.
so what
Well,
happens to the give back?
Historically, we have not been able to spend all of the money we collect and we amass it because it takes us so long to tool up. We don't have any predictability in rates, so by the time we tool up and we get momentum and staffing and resources, then it's gone, and so we kind of tumble. So the ratepayer advocate, I believe, is trying to say that in the last 2 years, money that we historically have had great difficulty in spending will end up going back to the rate base if we can't spend it, and to the extent that at the end we would be exposed to inflation, we would have to save an additional 2% in productivity to even be able to move forward.
Is
At
that
that point.
2% factor written into the ordinance? I didn't see it.
Yes.
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 I saw your 2% where you can go ahead and adjust the rates.
Isn't that 2% actually .007 when you do the math?
Yeah, the 2% again would be roughly 0.7% overall because it's only for 35% roughly of the revenue stream. Right, of the base.
And that's in the ordinance.
Right, and the 2%, so we would look at inflation, we have it specifically identified, and then we subtract 2%. So if, let's just say for the sake of example, inflation was 3%, DWP would be able to get a 1% adjustment on the base rate, which would be 0.35% total.
Mr. Chair, not to change the subject here, but Marcy, you just said something about, I made a little notation about recruiting and hiring. You mentioned historically we've had money on the table, but can't hire people fast enough when there's money to do so. So I don't want to divert the presentation here,
Very,
but
very quickly, it's two different buckets. In utility, you have the O&M bucket and you have the capital bucket, and we set our rates to collect both of them theoretically. Our capital comes in, but we have difficulty in spending it. That's where the money comes up. You can't take capital money and then make staffing investments with it. Also,
how do you reconcile those two?
what we've done is literally let people attrit out and not do work and hope that the rate increase goes through. The vast amount of this has been said is going to go for contracts, so it'll go for a lot of economic development. But we also need to reach a logical core staff load to be able to address our normal workload, and then you use contracts to deal with the peaky stuff.
This post 5-year adjustment mechanism is on page 27 at the end of the first full paragraph.
Okay. That begs the following question for me. So if there is no rate case, does the utility get cost of inflation adjustments ongoing? The way it's written now?
No. You say that again.
So you mentioned the cost of the adjustment is a cost of inflation adjustment minus 2% productivity
Yes.
to incent the good people at the utility to do what they're supposed to do. Not if there is no rate action subsequent to the 5-year case, that cost, that adjustment of inflation is there ongoing until it's changed, the way it's written today. It doesn't expire, for example, at the end of 5 years.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so is there really an incentive to make a rate case at that point? I know that we're grimacing at a 2% sort of productivity factor, but if you're getting inflation,
It depends on what inflation is.
I think that's my point. So-
At current rates of inflation, this would be 0, so it wouldn't be changing. If the inflation rate goes up to 4 or 5%, it would be, but remember, that would be affecting the whole range of their ongoing cash costs, both capital and operating costs. it would be 2% less. So to keep them out of trouble, but they'd have a lot of pressure.
Okay.
And it would be 2% every year, so at the end of year 4, you'd have to have a 4% improvement, and then, and so on.
In the world of utility performance-based rate making, a 2% performance factor is
Tough.
real tough.
I get it. Okay. Continue, Dr. Pickle.
One of the questions, my office made it to about 50 of the 70 presentations, and a common question we heard was, this all sounds good, but we don't trust you. And one of the components, the key component of that is, where's the money go? And quite often, there was a focus on special projects. We attempted to unravel that Gordian knot, and we looked at the whole range of external relationships, everything from the Lacretz Center to charity table contributions. And that number was about $10 million. And our attitude is at 0.2% of the overall DWP budget. That is smaller than many utilities spend in this area, and it's certainly appropriate, especially in areas that might have an upside like the Lacretz Center. So report it, make it public every year, treat it as a budget item. If people need to push that number up, fine, but we should understand why we're pushing it up. City services. The CAO bill is about $25 million annually. In addition to that $25 million, there are other city services, often from Bureau Street Services for repaving, post various activities. That averages up and down between about $54 million and $65 million per year.
So just to be clear for those watching at home here, that means that that's money separate aside from the transfer.
That's separate than aside from the transfer.
And this is money that the utility is writing a check to the city for services like legal, street services, the coordination, personnel, things of that
Yeah,
nature.
correct. And in addition, city departments have bill payments that are due DWP. We discovered in the billing review that some departments were behind, and we thought a regular sunshining of department amounts that were either in dispute or undisputed that were more than 180 days behind would be important, just to understand how that's lagging.
How much are we talking there? If you had a guess? City departments owing the utility, I mean, sort of, or the whole category of...
Probably if you added disputed, undisputed, people who can't make their payments on our schedule,
These
but
are city
instead
departments.
only get
Yeah.
funded, every 180 days. If you rolled it all together, I'd put it probably between 50 and 60 million.
So $50 or $60 million separate and aside from what the CAO is sending you as a bill.
And they're just long arrears, some disputed.
At 50 or 60 or 15 or 16? I didn't hear.
50 or 60.
50 or 60, okay. In addition to that.
In addition,
Good hit.
one of the challenges for contracting out is contracting out has to be approved in an IBEW MOU process called Appendix B. And while most of these things are dealt with quickly, there's a small percentage that gets hung up over time. We're just recommending a regular sunshining of the calendar of when current reviews were started and stopped, and if they're still pending, they should be shown as not still pending, along with the date the discussions were started. On solar is a good example of monitoring things that perhaps DWP should not do. Utility-built solar, DWP's projects to date have been multiples of retail costs of electricity. They've gotten better, but even proposed projects now are twice the cost of retail electricity. And the solar industry overall is now putting in facilities for at or less than the retail cost of electricity. So we should limit.
Just a quick observation. Remember, we are driven by externally imposed targets from the state to meet interim thresholds of renewable percentages. And so we can tell you frequently that there will be at some point buyer's remorse with some of these purchases. The problem is it's very difficult to be able to make it. You can go with power purchase arrangements, but they're also going to hold you hostage. Everyone's familiar with the moving landscape here.
And I think there's a lot to talk about there
Yeah.
when we get to the electricity side of the things, but I understand this is sort of broadly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Let's.
This is part of the joint cost. It was just, it's, overall issue is outsourcing. Let's outsource what we're more expensive at. Let's not outsource what we're less expensive at, or where security or reliability is key. Right now, training dollars overall are $130 million a year. That training is essential. One of the challenges we think is most of those training dollars are labor dollars spent inside DWP, talking to DWP. We think a little more new blood needs to be mixed into that training to see what is happening more across the industry. On labor costs, the total compensation study had good news, bad news, and good news. Good news is the 2012 review showed base salaries at about 75th percentile in the industry. We surveyed a bigger group of the organization, 56% of the organization. This time, we were able to find comparable categories in peer groups, large peer groups, and it's slightly below 75th percentile, reflecting that the period of no COLAs. In cash compensation above base, largely overtime, we were wildly out of market, way above the 75th percentile. That needs to be managed and pulled back in. That'll take a multi-year period to do that.
It'll
But
take investments in the infrastructure. It's what it's going to take. As long as it's breaking, I'm going to pay overtime. You don't have any choice, or leave the water off or the lights out.
What's the 75th percentile? You're basing it on what?
Industry standard?
in the overtime cash expenditures, it was based on comparison to a survey of about 1,000 utilities nationwide. And
We're a quarter away from being the worst.
Okay. Yeah.
no, well, actually on overtime, it was
are the
way, you are on the worst.
We are the worst.
Well into the worst.
In the
Not
overtime.
entirely, quarter away.
What's the percentile in overtime?
Pardon?
It's not 75th in overtime?
No, it's 75th on base salary, a little bit better than 75th on base salary. That's an improvement from the prior. In overtime, well above the 75th percentile. On retirement,
Are you talking 90th percentile? What are you?
we did this by quartiles. It's deep into the fourth quartile.
It's really high.
Well, yeah.
Yes, and so, but I mean, I think here's a good, I think, opportunity to reflect on the, and I understand sort of the infrastructure and needing more capital cost to re-break things, you have more OT, but I would argue that, this is our challenge as managers. The enterprise, the council, the commission, the mayor, that's our challenge to manage those resources. So I think the folks that we've got out there that are doing the hard work, they're doing the best that they can, but when you measure them, they are the highest paid, least productive, more overtime than industry standard, and I think that's our problem.
And it's in part the work processes that are in the midst of this. The DWP is very strongly siloed, and that creates problems.
It also is important to bear in mind that some of the overarching processes, like the challenges of working in the street, when you can only be out there for 4 hours and half that time is set up in takedown, you're going to be inefficient.
But we could fix that, couldn't we?
We could.
Right? That would take what now? The
It
mayor,
would- We have a
council.
pilot program that we've made a recommendation to a couple of the council people that we're asking them to carry to allow us to quantify our impacts on the street, to let us on collector streets, to let us on counterflow to congestion, and we're hoping we can get someone to carry that.
And so, again, I think it's a management challenge, and I think we can figure out how to fix all of that. I don't want to sort of take the bait here on beating up the workforce. They're doing a tremendous job out there
Workforce is
for us.
doing an incredible job.
But we're the governors of the enterprise, and we are, wow, that sounded really Star Trekky, didn't it, Bob? Of the utility. I don't know why I looked to you. I'm the Trekkie. it's in our hands. But I mean, where we rank is not a good story.
And then another component of this is looking at productivity. We were in the 75th percentile in a number of samples, cutting at it different ways. We were either 75th percentile or fourth quartile. So we have challenge for his improvement there. Why are those challenges important? These charts prepared by Navigant did a different cut in a different group of utilities. Our water rates are increasing at a faster rate than other utilities, and we're moving out of our low-tier spot in this process. So we need to turn that productivity around. We need to turn the cost structure around. To do that, it takes investment and it takes time. Again, to repeat, we think DWP's plan will be difficult to execute with the labor costs absent changes. We think those changes are important. We're proposing the importance of the next stage of benchmarking and other productivity analysis. We hope to have this, at least beginning efforts on metrics by June 1, as I stated earlier. And we think we have a way of implementing this quickly using some of the existing consulting resources. And then our key areas for concern are overtime costs and possibly some healthcare design changes as allowed within the MOU negotiations.
Hey, can I interrupt for a second? How does page 10 on your document compare to page 7 about our rates being competitive on the other document? I must be missing something because
There are differences of opinion.
Well, and I think that's a combined, you're looking at a combined chart that was in ours, was both water and power. This is just water, and part of what we have, there's some of those that are on there, Burbank, which gets some funding from the federal government for the cleanup, and Glendale. So it's just that is purely water, unless I'm mistaken.
That's purely water.
Right.
I think there are also some methodology differences.
Andrew, into the mic, please, so folks who are listening.
I'm sorry. I think there are some methodology differences. I think one of the things we found in both the power and the water, GWP's rates are still low, but not as low as they once were, not as low in comparison across the board if you do it with a slightly different methodology. So I think these are more reflective of the average costs for people.
And for the record, Andrew Rea with Navigant, who did the case rate review for us. Bob.
because I just would love to tease it out because I get asked this all the time by constituents of how we compare. And I like to give them the good, I think we have a good story. I like to give them the good story and make sure that I have all the facts.
We can go into that more in a sec if you like when we go through our report.
Okay.
We can explain the differences so that you understand them fully.
Sounds good.
So in closing, we encourage approval of these proposed rates and ordinances. And then I don't think I need to go through the more detailed comments.
Great, thank you. I'd like to get to Navigant next, but School Board Member Ratliff, I know that we're running late here.
Oh, no, we're fine.
Yeah,
This happens in our meetings all the time.
Hopefully, this will inform your comments here to change your position. All right. Andrew, let's go ahead and talk about, we'll do the review.
Can we slide down?
Yes, I'll go.
That'd be great. No, you stay, Jim.
No, I'll just move over to Marty's.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Just wait for the presentation to come up. Just be a sec.
All right. As we're waiting, Jeff, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
So I alluded to it a second ago that it's being called a 5-year rate proposal, but in reality it covers 4 years and 3 months. How does the department intend to recover the revenues for the first year?
So there's a industry standard mechanism called decoupling. that we're going to use and what the decoupling, when Dr. Pickle was talking about the base rate revenue target, it compares what the base rate revenue target is that we actually recover, and we look at that. So at the end of the fiscal year, we'll compare how much base rate revenue target. And looking prospectively, not retroactively, but prospectively, we're going to look at, do we have enough revenue to meet our fixed needs? If we don't, it's collected over the following calendar year. And so all the rate increases that you see assume that our rate goes in on April 1st, and we're going to be short, we know, on some of that revenue, which we will capture in the following calendar year. And again, there was a great letter, I think, written by the NRDC that went through the legal arguments of decoupling. That's what we're using going forward.
I guess where I struggle with this is you're guaranteed to be to not collect 8 months worth of revenues in a 3-month period. I mean, it's a really good bet, right?
Well, one of the changes that we put in is that to the extent we are short of revenue from the first year, we will capture that over the following 2 calendar years.
So you'll spread it over the 2, so it's layered on top of the other rates.
And on top of that, and again, we're talking more on the power side on this, the base rate or the wholesale revenues will go to offset that, and the contribution and aid will go to offset that. We think that actually there will be no impact over those 2 years because we traditionally will capture more on the wholesale revenue side than what we budget, because we budget very conservatively.
Why not just start on a brand new fiscal year, July 1?
We need, for this fiscal year, we need to meet our financial metrics. We need the rate increase to help us to meet our financial metrics for fiscal year 15-16.
Even with the analysis that you did in case 93 and 94, it says that you don't have a rating agency change as a result of if you got nothing more from us. So when you say that you have to make your performance rate metrics, I don't understand why you would sort of jam-pack 1 year into a 3-month period.
So again, under the accrual method, we're going to look at what the revenue that we earned during that fiscal year. We may collect the cash later, and that's what the rating agencies are going to look at to make sure that we meet our debt service coverage, make sure we meet our minimum cash targets, make sure we meet our full obligation coverage, all of those things. But we need to have that in order to meet those targets that we went over 2 weeks ago.
Okay. It just seems like there's other ways to do this. I know that you legally could do this. And it seems that it's a smaller rate on a per-year basis if you spread it over 5, but it just doesn't...
I mean, we have to make those results for fiscal year 15-16. Again, there's a number of reasons why all the delays occurred, but we are where we are, and this is something we worked at with Dr. Pickle and Navigant, how best to suit this, and that's where a lot of the changes that happened, quite honestly, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we were working over to minimize the impact to our customers.
Okay. Andrew.
Okay. I'll skip the preliminaries and get to the key findings. I think you've heard today, and we believe that, and I'm only going to talk about the water system, not the power system today. The water system is, without a doubt, facing numerous challenges, including upgrading aging infrastructure, reducing the reliance on purchased water, increasing local water supplies, and maintaining regulatory compliance. And we think the important thing about those statements is, if you look at the rate increase, that really is what's being funded. We tried to see if there were significant dollars being spent on things other than these things in the rate increase, not infrastructure, not regulatory compliance. We found only a couple of discretionary programs. They actually had to do with the mayor's targets exceeding what's required by regulation and some other things. And we looked at the total amount of that, and it's not material. So the rate increase really is focused on the areas that the department's talked about, and we think that's important to say. We also think the department has prepared detailed plans to address these issues. We're impressed with how the water system has planned. It's not perfect. I don't think there is perfection, but they are well thought out and well analyzed plans, and they do address the issues. And that's a big change from previous administrations and previous generations where I would say it was more highly tactical. There is a much more strategic bent into the department's planning. That said, there are global issues to address at DWP, such as productivity and total comp that Dr. Pickle talked about, And those are significant issues. The recent report from Oliver Wyman, I think, did an excellent job of illuminating those issues and putting them in perspective for this particular action. So with those sort of conditions, we do believe the rate increase is reasonable and well supported, but we also think there are some additional actions that this body and the full council can take. One of those specifically is we think, and today I think was a great example, I think there is confusion in the ordinance language and there is confusion in people's understanding of what the midpoint review is and how it actually will work. We think there's time to tighten that up a little bit so that everybody has clarity with what exactly is a midpoint review. Is it starting at the right time? Could it be moved up? You raised the issue of, will it only be effective in the last year of it? So is it really a midpoint review or a tail end review?
Right.
I think there's time to have discussion around that, tighten the ordinance language. Everyone did their best. It was a big rush to the finish line to sort of meet these timelines. So a little bit of help from the city attorney and the department could clarify those things, tighten them up, and make it better.
In fact, one of your recommendations is to move it up from June 1 of 2019 to June 1 of 2018, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I like that recommendation.
We also think, so the Oliver Wyman study, because of the peer groups are not as well defined on the water side as they are on the power side, really wasn't able to do a full productivity study on the water system. They did it for power. We, in our report, took the total system in a very high-level way. We do think that the department should do a full productivity study of the water system to see where it is, specific to the water system, before the end of 2016. We think that would help put in perspective, are the productivity issues universal, or are they more prone on the power side and the joint systems side? And I think that's important information. You know, our observation is we believe the water system tends to have better management practices, better planning practices. It could be their productivity is not exactly in the same place as the power system, so let's find out. And so we think that's something that the department should undertake. As Dr. Pickle said, many of the water systems plan rely on hiring and contracting out. For the capital programs to be successful, the department needs to employ, we think, outside-the-box thinking. These issues have been around for as long as I've been involved with the department, and I think we're sort of making some progress, and there was some really significant progress made where the department changed its procurement process on the energy efficiency side and said we're going to utilize SCAPA as a way to short-circuit the procurement process. We thought that was outside-the-box thinking. We think more of that needs to happen. We think we think the department needs to get a little bit more help from the city, maybe a little bit more help from outside the department in general, because it's critical. To spend the money, you really have to make this part work, and it's not there yet, right? So I think making sure that happens, and I think part of the outside-of-the-box thinking is getting the unions and city leadership more involved. The union's part of the solution, the city leadership is part of the solution. You know, how you work with the city's own human resources group, that's something that we've recommended change as well. So we think some outside-the-box thinking here will help streamline things. So Dr. Pickle, I think, as well as the general manager, have said we need to really get the water main replacement, pipeline replacement to a level higher than even is in the rate thing. We agree, but it's tricky. There's a point where you can throw money at it and get no additional bang for the buck, and I don't think there's a full understanding of where that is. If you can spend money and improve the, lower the failure rate and improve the pipeline replacement rate, that's money well spent. I agree with Jeff, it's 3 times more expensive to replace it when it breaks. I think having the department, and it's not us, this is not an ad for Navigant, having the department get the right resources to really apply sophisticated mathematical modeling to what is the optimal rate we can do, how much money could we throw at it, can we get above where we are today, is worth understanding. This is a very good step with a recognition of we're managing the resources we think we can manage. For the city, that might not be enough. You might say, we'll allocate more money if we think you can spend more, because the issue is that important. So we think that study is worth having done. we've talked about mandate and infrastructure needs drive the capital programs, and I think there's been enough discussion about them. But we believe, as I just said, even with the proposed rate increase, aging infrastructure won't reach the optimal levels, so more needs to be done. We do agree with the department without the proposed rate increase, the department will either fail to comply with mandates or rely more heavily on borrowing to fund its capital programs, which would drive up already high levels of debt. So the department is a little bit different. So an investor-owned utility, if it doesn't get its rate increase, scales back. It says, well, you didn't give us the money, we're not going to meet these metrics, we're not going to meet these targets, we can't, we don't have enough money. The department will say, well, we're here for the public good, we have to do this, we're going to keep borrowing. And at some point, borrowing has huge costs. So the city really has the dilemma, fund the programs and meet the mandates, and the dollars really are for the mandates, or let the department get more and more into debt, which will create really significant issues for future generations of ratepayers and eventually threaten the department's financial health. So not a good option. So funding the rate increase, with the right oversight and conditions, we think is the right thing to do. It's important to meet the mandates and not run up debt. Funding the critical programs and ensuring the water system can implement the programs at scale is absolutely important. The proposed ordinance includes new program metrics that will allow decision makers to assess performance and scale back rates or increase rates if need be. And just a quick discussion about the metrics. So the metrics are not perfect. You pointed out better governance would reduce the need for metrics. I agree with that. But even with better governance, it's nice to know where you stand, right? And the metrics provide transparency that hasn't been there before. And I think the metrics are a first step. One of the things that we think a year from now, the metrics should be reviewed. You might want new ones, you might want to tighten them, but they really are an important step, and I think there will be much greater transparency than you've enjoyed before, or not enjoyed before, I guess, in this particular case. So we think it's huge progress, and the department enthusiastically embraced them, so I give them credit for that. I think this body and their own board should consistently tighten the deadbands. Personally, I think the deadbands are a little excessive at this point in time, but they're a good start. And we could argue about where they should be all day, but over time they should get more stringent.
And so just mechanically, how does that work? Because I'm still struggling to understand that. So you've got the list of performance metrics, you've got the bands and the tolerance, and then on a yearly basis there's a review to the board.
Twice a year.
Twice a year there's a review. Then the board and the ratepayer advocate has the option to then report that to the council, but they're reporting it automatically to the board. If you do come to the council, how do we impact the tightening of their efforts over there? We could, I guess, 245 something, you could recommend it, but asserting jurisdiction over a report doesn't give us the ability to change or massage anything that's happening at the utility. So effectively, how is it that we, in this governance structure, make some change?
We're at the same time reviewing those metrics in terms of the deadbands as well as the definition of the metrics. And one of the unusual things and one of the great suggestions by Navigant was putting this in the ordinance. One of the great games of doing performance of indicators of any type is you, when necessary, move the target to where the arrow is going. And by locking this in the ordinance and having a very formal process for reviewing this, it is very formal when you want to change the definition of the arrow or move where the target is.
I think the other part of the answer to your question is some of the feedback we've gotten since the ordinance has been out, and we've gotten some of this feedback from your staff. When you read the ordinance, it's not really clear what this committee's role is. It is somewhat left up to, could be the 245 process. It could be that if you're out of the band, Dr. Pickle automatically comes to the Energy and Environment Committee. And I think one of the things that could be tightened up over the next few weeks is, how does that really work? I think the ordinance language could be a bit more clear in terms of when you're out of tolerance or out of the dead bands, what steps exactly happen and who's in the review process, what are Dr. Pickles' obligations to those bodies. When we were in the room talking about it, I think we had an understanding of how it would work. And then when you read the ordinance, I'm not sure it quite fits our understanding, or I might still understand it, but it doesn't convey the right message to you. And I think that's something that we could deal with.
And let me say that, the intent I absolutely appreciate. I, for one, will not be sitting in this chair. So in some ways I'll be very relieved. But so I very much appreciate what it attempts to do, and it really shines a light in performance and productivity. But I don't know. I don't know that it does any more than that. And so it's a small pitch for saying that building this we're building on a legacy system here, and we should consider buying a new system is all I'm saying. So I just didn't understand mechanically how it worked, but I think I do now.
Okay.
But the metrics also build a base for, even if we change the system, we'll want to measure how we are improving on that.
The water system's approach to ramping up its CapEx, we believe, appears to be reasonable. I actually make the appears go away and say we think it is reasonable. The water system has sound plans for its key capital programs. We've had in-depth conversations with the management. We've looked at all the plans. We've looked at the financials. We've looked hard at the department's ability to do what it says. And we think one of the things that we really appreciate in the water system is they've spent the money in their budgets on what they said they would spend it on. And if you look at going back 2012-13 through 14-15, you'll see the trend has gotten better and better. They were at about 80% of spending their capital. In 2013-14, they were closer to 90, 14-15 at 100. We believe the most recent financials will show the same trend. Very little moving of money between projects that, in ways that weren't discussed. They're doing what they're saying, and that's really good. That breeds credibility. So we think their track record is great. We do believe that LADWP should develop more formal and rigorous workforce plans with an outsourcing strategy to plan for and expedite the long contracting and hiring processes. So you can't execute the plan with the resources they have. They have to contract out more. They have to use more outside help. We think a much more detailed plan than what we've seen is part of that. So if you're going to spend the money, all of this money, you want to know that there's a solid, well thought out plan on how they use people, how the unions bought into that, what more outside the box thinking, all of that. So we think the department has time to do that in the rest of this year. And that's something that I think will help you going forward. So I think we've talked a lot about performance reporting. One of the other things, though, that I think is important is, so Jeff or his successors plays a key role. The way the ordinances are written, the chief financial officer of LADWP is directly responsible to report to you, to report to the board and the full council how they're doing it from a financial perspective, both the power and the water and the joint systems. And to do that, Jeff has to have complete transparency and visibility into everything that's going on in the department. And in previous administrations, that wasn't the case. So I think one of the key things that's happened in this process is to strengthen the role of the CFO, increase the accountability, and require who's ever in that office to report back in a more formal manner. So you have, you'll have Dr. Pickles' reports in terms of his opinion of how they're doing, but you'll have the CFO reporting directly to you in ways that you didn't in the past. We've talked about what happens when they miss targets, so I won't do that again. So the midpoint review, and so we've sort of already talked about this. I think there are some timing issues on the midpoint review. There are some how specific it needs to be to make everybody comfortable that it truly is a midpoint review and the steps. And, I've spoken with the department, and I think there's some time to tighten that up as part of this process. And hopefully get this body comfortable with it. We think it's a great step in the right direction, and now that we have a little time, we can actually tighten it up, I think.
My little time, you mean the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think we all understand what the issues are, right? So I think 2 weeks will be enough. Yes. Governance reform. So there's really sort of 3 tiers of governance. There's short-term tactical, and I would say the increased reporting, the metrics, the transparency, short-term tactical. They don't fix governance. They illuminate what's going on in ways that weren't before. In the medium term, there are internal changes in DWP, such as the strengthening of the CFO's office. Marcy's recently unveiled a new reporting organization. All of those things we think are midterm. They don't require ordinance changes or charter changes or anything like that. Then, as you're well aware, because you're intimately involved in this as a body, there are longer-term governance changes. I do agree with the chair's earlier comments that those are essential to really getting things on the right track. And, we talked about that in the IEA study that we presented. And, we're, as a firm, tremendously pleased to see how enthusiastically the city is taking that up. And we think that is the longer-term solution. So continuing to work on the longer-term governance things we think is absolutely important over time. So quickly, key recommendations. So one of the things that's really worked with this administration is there's been much more collaboration with the city, as well as outside people like us. So we think the department needs to continue to work closely with city leadership and outside experts to streamline the hiring process to find a more formal, rigorous, and diverse outsourcing strategy. To increase the proposed mainline, trunk line, and large valve replacement plans to the maximum sustainable level. And again, we think that we need outside study, outside help, outside experts. Productivity study for the water system that will match the power systems. After year 1, continue to refine the board metric variances, and that should be done by OPA, ENE, LADWP, and CLA and CAO because we think they're part of the discussion. Fully define the midpoint review. We just talked about that. Something we haven't talked about today, but Dr. Pickle brought it up. So to fully examine LADWP's debt levels to ensure there's complete understanding of the department's financial situation. The department relies on debt, and it is increasingly going to rely on debt. Hiccups in the rate, this rate action or future rate actions will further exacerbate the debt issues. We don't believe, so this is Navigant's opinion, the city fully understands the consequences of the debt trajectory and what it means for future generations and what it means for the department's ability to provide service levels. And we think that's really important for the city to get its handle on. And once it understands, it could say, we're comfortable with what the department's doing, that's the best thing for the city, or no, we'd like to get a lower debt level and have today's citizens pay more of the share of providing the cost of service. It's always good to do that when you're not necessarily dealing with the immediacies of this rate action. So, shortly after it would be probably a fine time to do it. But we think it's a really important part for the city. I did that. Formalize and fully document the revenue requirements determination methodology. We think the department does a great job making rates with the infrastructure that they have and the staff that they have. You've got one person who really has to do all of this with a model that is an antique, to say the least. So when we come in and review it, or subsequent consultants come and review it, it takes a lot of time. It is very confusing. It is not a great process or a great model. We think, once this is done, the department should update that, look at its staffing level, fully sort of resource that department and sort of move it up.
And just one comment on that, to Andy's point, we're using Excel spreadsheet models to do both water and power rates. We have a contract with Utilities International, which is really the type of solution that Andy is talking about. Once we get the stability and we're not in the rate process, in fact, we have Utilities International here today. We're going to implement that system. So we have taken steps to do that. We fully agree with his recommendation.
And I think that's all I have.
Okay. Colleagues, there are some speaker cards. You have questions now, or should we hear from our speakers?
I'm game to go with the speakers first.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield, that okay with you?
That's, I know they've been waiting a long time.
All righty. Let's go ahead and go to some speaker cards that might inspire us with some more questions. We'll start with School Board Member Monica Ratliff. Yes, please.
So I'm Monica Ratliff, and I'm the school board member for
I'm sorry,
District-
Monica. We're not going to time Ms. Ratliff out of respect to the position that she holds as my school board member, so we'll go ahead and
Thank
take
you.
as much time as you need.
Thank you. So as a representative of District 6, that's about 130 schools, 100,000 students. And I'm here today because I was driving to work in January, and I heard on the radio that the DWP committee had approved the rate hikes. And I thought to myself, well, you know, it's a little bit of a bummer to have to pay more as an individual payer, but I recognize the infrastructure is a disaster and we need to fix it. But I thought, since I'm on my way to Beaudry to chair the budget committee, I will make sure to ask, what are we doing to make sure that this doesn't have a huge impact on the schools? And I was very disappointed by the answers that I got. And so I thought, well, this is a real problem. Let's investigate. So I started asking questions, and I found out that this increase is going to impact the schools. Essentially, in 5 years, we'll be paying about $22.4 million more than we're paying right now. And so if you've been paying any attention to LA Unified budget woes, you know that we're going to go into a position where we don't have basically hundreds of millions of dollars. So this $22.4 million is going to be very difficult for us to absorb. And we'll run about 211 teachers or 365 building and grounds workers. So at that point, I quickly drafted a resolution because I knew that we were running out of time because of your committee meeting. And I brought it to the board, and they passed it. Oh, and we have some handouts. I don't know the procedure at the board. We hand them to somebody, and then they hand them out.
It works just like that here.
Okay, great. So, so what you'll see is in this my letter to you, and then the letter from the superintendent to all of you, as well as the press release. There's been some talk of this press release that I released that some people have said is inaccurate. So it's in there, so you can actually read it for yourselves, because I think it's extremely accurate. And then there's also the resolution that was passed as well as the original draft. And I think that's important for me to talk about because we have been very interested in making sure that the resolution was accurate. So in terms of the numbers and so forth that are presented in the resolution, we talk about the impact that it's going to have every year on LA Unified. So that's in there. I also included some emails because I think it's important for it to be very transparent about what happened when I brought forward this resolution. So there's been some talk, when I brought forward the resolution, there was some talk about how, well, there's this MOU out there that was drafted with the DWP, and it's going to protect LA Unified from the impact of these rate increases. But if you look at the emails, what you'll see is that as soon as it even became apparent that I was going to bring forward this resolution, the DWP put the MOU on hold. And it clearly says that in tab 5. You'll see the emails that went back and forth. So it's a little difficult for me to trust that this MOU is going to protect LA Unified when as soon as someone within LA Unified raises some concerns or brings forward a resolution that the DWP doesn't like, they put the entire MOU on hold. So I think that's a little bit problematic. So while I understand what the DWP has said will be done to protect LA Unified, I don't take a lot of comfort in that MOU because it apparently could be yanked away at any time. We brought Mark Hovatter, who's the CFO, and he can talk a little bit, Chief Facilities Officer. He can talk a little bit about the impact, if you want at some point, to LA Unified, because there's also a discrepancy in terms of what LA Unified believes the impact will be over those 5 years with the MOU and what DWP believes the impact will be over those 5 years. So recognizing that the infrastructure is important, and recognizing that all of you, I get it, your backs are against the wall in many ways, I am interested in trying to figure out ways we can work together to honestly mitigate the impact of these rate increases, and with some sort of sense of security. I noticed earlier you said, I'm not going to be the chair in the future, right? Well, then who's going to be looking out for LA Unified in terms of what was promised and what is actually done? So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer questions, or I could speak forever on this, but I recognize you got a packed house of people who want to do public speaking. So, so with that, unless there's any questions, I will go ahead and end that.
Great, thank you
Thank
for
you.
your public comment today. All right, so we will go to Carol Schatz, Mark Hovater, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, Rachel Horning, and I think we can fit one more up there, Jose Gutierrez.
Carol Schatz, President and CEO of the Central City Association, the Downtown Center BID. Together, these two organizations represent some of the biggest property owners in Los Angeles, including not only high-rise office properties, but universities, hospitals, and light manufacturing. Commercial property owners pay 60% of the total power rate revenue and about one-third of the water revenue DWP gets annually. We have a great stake in this debate. We're addressing both increases at this time. The department came to us in 2010 with a huge power rate increase. After analyzing it, we determined that it was entirely political, that the numbers didn't add up, and we opposed it, and we killed it. This current proposal is markedly different. Marcy Edwards and her staff spoke to us several times, answered our questions, provided factual backup for the increases that were frankly incontrovertible. They ran assessments.
If you could just finish your thought. They ran assessments.
They ran assessments for our property owners who didn't have a DWP rep. And these, we don't like these increases. No big ratepayer does, but they're necessary. The department has done its homework, and it's time for us to move this infrastructure project, because that's really what it is in our view, forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Schatz. Mark.
Mark Hovater, Chief Facility Executive, Los Angeles Unified School District. I want to publicly say we appreciate DWP and the customer service they've provided. In particular, we had to relocate a few schools because of an environmental issue in Porter Ranch. They had people that gave up vacation, worked around the clock to help us. We also appreciate the aging infrastructure and the need to update it. We have over 800 buildings that are 75 years old or older, and for every utility failure we have on the street side of the meter, we have a failure as well on our side. It impacts us when we have outages, and it creates a lot of effort and an expense for us. We understand that there might be a rate increase necessary to take care of that. We want you to understand that we're classified as a single large commercial customer, which means that we're in the same group as other commercial customers. We think we're unique in that while others, including the colleges, can pass on an increase in their overhead to their customers, we don't have that ability. For us, an increase in our overhead means we have to spend less money out of our general fund. We have spent a lot of money ourselves, $200 million so far, to do infrastructure upgrades. We're not just looking for DWP to help us, but we're very appreciative that they do have an MOU. We believe the MOU has some very optimistic goals. Our history has shown so far in the last 15 years we haven't been able to achieve those goals. We believe the impacts are going to be significant. We try to be a good neighbor. We work with other people that do projects on our sites. We have third parties that have gotten grants that do bioswales. It helps recharge the groundwater. It helps eliminate some of the stormwater runoff for the streets around us. We're actively working on gray and purple water wherever we can. We look forward to continuing working with DWP to help us. But again, the estimates, we believe we have not historically achieved the optimum estimates. It costs a lot of money to work on 80-year-old buildings, and the costs tend to be higher. Their estimates, I believe, are based on 100% of the money going to actual infrastructure or utility increases. We end up spending a lot of our money on lead abatement, asbestos abatement, and other things necessary to do that.
Very good.
We look forward to the city
Thank you.
working with us.
Ms. Horning and Mr. Gutierrez.
Hi, good evening. My name is Rachel Horning. I'm a policy manager with BizFed, the LA County Business Federation, and we're a grassroots alliance of over 155 top business groups representing 275,000 employers in LA County. BizFed believes DWP must prioritize efficiency and transparency. While we have not taken a position on the size of the rate increase itself, we are concerned about where the money goes. We are opposed to additional money from ratepayers being transferred to the city's general fund, which does little to nothing to address the city's water supply and delivery issues. We support key elements in your motion and look forward to continuing a strong and constructive relationship with this committee to promote the success of DWP and a fair and transparent reboot. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Gutierrez, before you begin, if we can have Kent Minault, Wendy Legacki, Graciela Geyer, and Arthur Golding. I just called their names. Mr. Gutierrez.
Hi, my name is Jose Gutierrez, a community garden organizer in South LA and Filipino Town for about 5 years. I'm also on the board of directors for the LA Community Garden Council, and I'm here to support community gardens citywide and encourage City Council to work to mitigate the impacts of the water rate increase on low-income communities of color that garden in South LA and Filipino Town. One, we're asking for accountability from the LADWP and city departments for accurate billing. One, because low-income community gardeners cannot afford the rate increases that are projected. Two, for leadership preparation in the community gardens. Many people don't know, but there's actually really organized governance structures in these community gardens, where community gardeners meet, discuss, and prepare such topics as water conservation. However, if we don't, leaders can plan properly if they don't know exactly how much they're being charged, and if they're being improperly charged. Three, it just causes confusions in the community gardens when you don't know how much exactly they're being charged, which just leads to gardeners not doing what they're supposed to be doing, gardening and living healthier lifestyles.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Ms. Legacki?
How did you know it was me?
Because I called your name.
I'm Wendy Legacki. I'm with the Sierra Club. I live in LA, so I'm a ratepayer. And I think that the raise is very helpful as an incentive to help people and schools to conserve. And for instance, I have potted plants, and they take a lot of water, so I'm getting rid of them. But as a teacher, I think that LA Unified could also use this incentive to bring some of their rates down. I don't have all the facts on that, but I think that raising the rates does give people a good incentive to stop using the water that we don't have.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Arthur Golding. I'm here representing the Council for Watershed Health. I serve on the board of that organization, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. Healthy watershed means healthy land, healthy water, and healthy rivers. The Council has worked with DWP over the years on its integrated resources planning, on the Recycled Water Advisory Group. Council strongly supports use of groundwater, recharge of groundwater for drinking water. We support stormwater capture. We support conservation. We support this rate increase because we believe that necessary infrastructure investments are going to benefit all of the city, not just the ratepayers, but all of the city, in conservation, in water system reliability, water quality, and resilience. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Aisha Seiler, Teresa Martinez, Jack Humphreyville, Ruben Gonzalez. Ruben, why don't you start?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ruben Gonzalez. I'm here on behalf of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. Anyone who's had to deal with a power outage or a water main break realizes that we definitely require significant investment to upgrade and maintain our infrastructure, our water and power infrastructure. The business community has a long history of recognizing that improvements to and maintenance of our utility infrastructure are key to the health of our economy. Of the proposal before you, 80% of this expenditure plan, as laid out by the Department of Water and Power and confirmed by the ratepayer advocate, meets the priorities the Chamber Board set for support. That includes money to replace the city's aging power and water infrastructure, diversifying water and power supplies, improving customer service. But the approximately 20% of this rate increase, which would automatically be transferred to the city's general fund, does not meet that criteria. We believe that that funding needs to be invested further in the other priorities, and that would be a great commitment by this council to do so. Just real quickly, regarding the LA DWP governance reform proposal, we are very much and always in favor of governance reform of LA DWP. We just do not believe that that should hold up this decision. We need to move forward on this investment and then make the critical decisions on governance changes. Thank you so much.
Very good, thank you.
I'll go next. Thank you, Mr. Chair and other distinguished members of the Energy and Environment Committee. My name is Teresa Martinez. I'm the CEO of the Los Angeles Latino Chamber of Commerce, and I am proud to represent the LALCC this evening. The Los Angeles Latino Chamber of Commerce is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to create a platform for the growth of Latino-owned businesses, which includes weighing in on policy issues impacting our members in order to level the playing field to enable Latino firms' full participation in the local and national economy at a level representative of its demographics. Today, we are here to support the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's proposed rate increase. The LALCC represents tens of thousands of Latino-owned companies who prefer not to see utility rate increases. Nevertheless, Los Angeles business owners also recognize the critical need to replace aging and vulnerable water and power infrastructure in order to continue providing reliable service. Our members are aware of the need to protect the city from the effects of a sustained drought and ensure DWP can meet various regulatory and environmental mandates. We know it has been several years since the last rate increase was approved. However, we are confident that the council and other city council oversight agencies have made every effort to avoid unnecessary increases without compromising the service quality to which the member organizations have grown accustomed. We look forward to continuing this dialogue with the City Council on how best to serve the City of Los Angeles and help the Los Angeles Latino Chamber of Commerce prosper as well.
Thank
you for your
Ms.
time.
Martinez. Before you begin, Mr. Humphreyville, if Adam Lane, Alex Davis, and Jose Peralta can make their way up. Great, thank you.
My name is Jack Humphreyville. I'm with the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council, and I'm the chair of the DWP Advocacy Committee. Holding my nose, I support the 4.7% a year rate increase, and I mean holding my nose. But I still have several issues. One is I think this is discriminatory against single-family houses. In particular, we noticed that 45% of them were going to be on the higher rates. That's 300,000 homes. That's a lot of votes. That's a lot of votes, and homeowners vote. So beware. Secondly, I don't think we should be subsidizing LAUSD or Rec and Parks to any certain extent. Thirdly, I'm concerned about the ability to outsource, in the water particular for some of the water mains. And finally, I'm concerned about DWP being tapped for one water for expenses that they don't get any benefit from. I think the DWP has done a very good job of, reaching out and talking to everybody, ranging from the ratepayers advocate to Navigant to Jeff and Neil, as well as Marcy and Marty. But I'd like to also confirm that I think this rate increase, one, you should get your act in gear. This has been a waste of time. And the second thing is it doesn't have anything to do with the governance. The governance needs to be done over a thoughtful and not a rush to the ballot. Thank you.
Pedro Barrera, Ignacio Nunez, and Ruth Sarnoff. Mr. Lane?
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Adam Lane, the Legislative Director at the LA Business Council. I'm here to express our support for the proposed water rate increase. Our leadership voted to support both the water and power increases after several months of deliberations, where we heard from General Manager Edwards, Board President Levine, and the ratepayer advocate. We're happy to have seen the RPA describe both increases as reasonable, but even most so, they are necessary to meet regulatory mandates, renewable energy targets, and replacing vulnerable infrastructure. For years, we've seen far too many broken water mains, and knowing that repairing infrastructure costs far more reactively than proactively. The rate increase will allow for the development of hundreds of miles of new water mains and increase water recycling facilities to reduce our reliance on market-driven water purchases that are only expected to rise in cost in the future. Delaying action on these rates will increase the vulnerability of LADWP's water and power infrastructure, resulting in more water main breaks and more frequent power outages, and also increase the cost to ratepayers. As such, I strongly urge this committee to vote in support of the water increase, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Adam. David Garden, Joanna Dyer, Andrew Douglas, and Graciela Geyer for a second time. And Kent Manow.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for letting us speak. My name is David Garden, and I represent the Crenshaw Community Garden in Los Angeles, and I'm going to speak quickly all about Schedule F, which nobody seems to, in any of these presentations, mention that the proposed increase is, yes, very high. It is exactly 289%. That is incredibly high for a low-income gardener who can barely afford to pay for their plot. Just so you know, I have been in touch with our council member, Herb Wesson's office, about, because he represents our district. The city of San Francisco community gardeners pay zero for water. And it may be subsidized by their park and rec department, I don't know, but the gardener, actually person who is the gardener who's raising food for their family, pays zero. And we currently pay Schedule F, and the 289% increase will be terrible. So we need to do something about that, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Johanna Dyer with I'm a resident of LA, and I'm a staff analyst with NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. As you know, water conservation is extremely important in Southern California, and pricing water appropriately is one of the most critical and cost-effective ways to promote water conservation. We strongly support several key aspects of the DWP water rates proposal for conservation purposes. Just very quickly, the four-tier structure, the decoupling system, which should encourage DWP to embrace new water efficiency measures while maintaining revenue stability, and the eventual elimination of or decrease of special rates for large tract irrigation and ag uses. But we do see that some features of the proposed rate structure also represent a significant missed opportunity to promote water conservation. To name one example from DWP's proposed rates for single-family residential customers, excessive use of water is priced at the Tier 4 rate, supposedly, but in fact, significant excessive use is also allowed within Tier 3 at a lower price. The city and state ordinances hold that an appropriate water allocation is 70 to 85% of evapotranspiration, which is a number that adjusts based on climate area. DWP's proposed rates allow water use up to 135% of that rate, which is by any definition excessive. So permitting excessive and not just high water use in that Tier 3 category can lead to higher prices for more modest users and serves as a customer disincentive to conservation measures where they're most needed. So we'd recommend that the water allocations be revised downward to set the boundaries for Tier 3 to 85% of that rate. And doing so could result in about 1.7% additional water savings, which is actually 1.1 billion gallons, or enough to supply the indoor water.
Ms. Dyer. If you could submit the rest of your comments, we'd be interested in hearing those. Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Douglas. I am a social sector consultant. I've worked with Metabolic Studio, and we've supported and funded the 2 Alex Hall studies that have been so crucial to all this work. I spent a lot of time also working with DWP on different initiatives, including Tap Water Appreciation Day. So I spent some time studying the water energy nexus, but I am here specifically in conditional support of this in terms of how it pertains specifically to the Schedule F and urban agriculture. We've got to reframe this in terms of food is a form of energy, just like water is a form of energy. You can't divorce one from the other, and it takes exponentially more water and power to grow a tomato hundreds of miles away, ship it here in a diesel truck, than it does to grow one down the street. Also, drought or no drought, growing food is a form of storage. You're recharging a depleted and highly polluted aquifer, which we need to do, and it mitigates heat island footprint. So I would love to see some sort of creative thought that is
at the higher end of whatever is being considered to offset the costs for, especially in areas of greatest need who are trying to grow food. And again, I think that grant fund should exist and be open to not just one nonprofit specifically, but any that can prove that they're mission driven. And a direct liaison would be fantastic because again, the sooner we decentralize all forms of energies, the more secure our future will be. Thank you very much.
Is Greg Lippy still here? He filled out a public comment card. I think he intended to fill it out for this item. Okay, he's not here. Okay, colleagues, questions for staff, or have you had enough? Mr. Blumenfield, staff come on back up so we can take some questions here. Mr. Blumenfield.
Okay, a couple questions actually related to the public comment, the school issue. Under Prop 26, even if we wanted to create a lower tier for our school districts and our students, is that allowed under Prop 26, or what's the issue there?
Anecdotally, I haven't asked that question this afternoon, and it's not even simply getting a state to change legislation or to write the rate. It would actually have to be a vote of the people of Sacramento, or people of California, excuse me. So no, there's no way to.
So under the current structure.
Under the current structure.
Even if we wanted to, as a group, say we value education, we value our students, we want to give them a lower rate. What I'm hearing is legally there's no way for us to do that.
That is what I've been advised. Though it is worth knowing that the LAUSD does not pay the utility users tax. So there already is, they are subsidized in that way.
And as I understand it, they're also paying less under us than they are in the other adjacent districts. Is that correct?
They are paying less, plus the rate increases in surrounding territories are higher than ours. I do want to make a very brief comment. I did, in fact, say to hold up on the MOU because I'm concerned about the timing of rates, and if they're not passed quickly, I would need to search for money, so I didn't want to spend money that I didn't have until we work our way through the process.
And Councilman, let me just be clear. Richard Toms with the City Attorney's Office. It's Prop 218 that would apply to a water measure, not Prop 26.
Prop 218. I knew that, but misspoke on that.
Understood.
Although related to that, there are things that we can do and should do to help the school districts, and I know we're doing a number of them in terms of efficiency. The other area I think we probably are doing things, but I'm particularly interested in is trying to help them aggregate their solar or virtual net metering. It actually was something that wasn't allowed. In 2009, I had a bill in Sacramento that passed that extended the virtual net metering to include school districts and municipalities. I got shot down on JPAs and a couple other things, but it expanded it. Is that something that we're pursuing in terms of helping them create, and what I mean by virtual net metering, I know you know, but for other folks is that most of the time when you're net metering, you have to be on location. So one campus can only produce the energy for that campus. But in the case of school districts and municipalities, you are allowed to produce, let's say, energy in Woodland Hills at the schools there where it's hot and sunny, and credit that for schools in other parts of the city. Is that correct, and is that...
I am not aware of any current moves toward aggregation. A lot of the industry now technologically is moving so quickly, and there's a lot of issues surrounding people choosing to be off the grid that I haven't seen a lot of focus there, but we have made investments with the school district that staff tells me is saving them over $3.5 million a year on the solar side.
I guess if we're not doing that, and I guess as a comment to the school district as well, I'd urge them to take advantage of that opportunity because it is a unique thing that municipalities and school districts have for virtual net metering to take advantage of. I also wanted to ask about another issue that was raised by a number of people, and it was cited a 289% increase for gardeners for Schedule F. I didn't understand that. I wanted to get your take on what that means in terms of the rates for the Schedule F.
I think I'll let Marty give you the history and the rundown on that one.
And Marty, so you can also help us understand the legal obligations for us, cost of service studies dictate how it is that we build our rates. So help us understand that, because I think that's an important piece in this conversation.
Related to both pieces, the school and...
It is, and I think that's why the school district is onto something, but I'm not sure that they're onto the right thing here.
So certainly, so we are obligated under Prop 218 to only charge or charge proportionally the actual costs of serving the water to our customers. So we can't favor one class of customer over another. They all have to pay their quote unquote fair share.
But to that point, you can't subsidize a class of, so it's suggested by the school district, at least in a communication, that they should get a lower rate, which ostensibly means that we're subsidizing them based on everybody else's rates.
That's correct.
And you can't do that.
Right, legally you can't, and that's actually the San Juan Capistrano case is the kind of the landmark case in that, and that's where rates were arbitrarily chosen that favored one class over another, and the rates were thrown out by a judge because it said you have to base it on what it costs to serve the water. You can't have one class of customers subsidizing the water use of another, and so part of our rate efforts here was to do a real robust cost of service study. Because there's always a possibility of getting sued over the rates, particularly with the tiers. We want to make sure that what we did was defensible and could win in court. And we believe we have a very sound study, it's very detailed, and we did this to actually, to really drive conservation-based rates based on the actual cost of service and providing those additional water supplies. With the school district, we did just provide the MOU. It was a 3-year MOU for a little over $45 million, and that's for water and power efficiency efforts. So hopefully that $45 million will become many years of savings that'll help the school district to manage this. Likewise, we also work with Rec and Parks because they have also Schedule F irrigation, and we've invested millions of dollars in drought-tolerant landscaping, helping them change their irrigation systems. We have a new smart meter program that we just implemented. We celebrated that about a week and a half ago, putting that in place. And so we're working as hard as we can to help our customers, save money. But at the same time, people have to pay their share.
If I could interject quickly, there is a significant increase in Schedule F because it was very heavily subsidized. And it's one of the reasons why we were recommending a transition to a balance point where the classes are carrying their own water, so to speak, over the 5-year term, because to try to make that transition more rapidly would create even greater rate shock as people who were heavily subsidized started to have to carry their own weight.
But on that point, because we've got a lot of folks who have been visiting offices on Schedule F, the spreading of that rate increase over a number of years, isn't that an admission from a cost of service study perspective that we're still subsidizing?
I'll leave that to legal's interpretation.
I think what we're doing is we're taking advantage of the time period of the rate action, if it were a 5-year, to bring it to a place where it's appropriate, where it's covering the cost, and we are avoiding a well-recognized principle of utility practices, avoiding rate shock. So that's what we're doing.
So we're observing that principle?
Yes.
Right. Okay. But if we wanted to be absolutely fail-safe, we would just go ahead and have no transition and jack it up 289%.
If that were the choice of the council, that's correct.
Okay. Does anyone know what that translates into as far as a dollar cost for a gardener who has a plot that is active for 1 year? Does anyone have that?
I don't have the exact numbers on that because we've been working with the gardening community. There's about 45 community gardens in the city. Some of them belong to two parent organizations, and so the data has been a little hard to get our hands on. But one thing that happens in San Diego and San Francisco, the gardeners have not been paying for water, but some agency has been paying the water bill. So the water company is not giving water for free. It's being paid by grants or a parent agency or something that's managing those. And we are working very actively trying to find a grant structure that might be able to do the same sort of things in Los Angeles where we can legally charge a water bill but find funding mechanisms for the community gardens to help defray that cost. And we have some pretty good leads on how to do that.
And things like energy conservation or groundwater recharge could be areas where a subsidy like that or a grant program like that could be channeled potentially.
Right.
Yes.
Lots and lots of rain barrels. Lots of them. Yeah.
Come back to me.
Mr. O'Farrell?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Just I had some very complimentary questions. So in the dueling letters between LAUSD and Department of Water and Power, one argument is efficiencies. You feel, and you touched upon that a little bit, you feel that it could actually result in a savings to LAUSD based on efficiencies.
I do, but I think it's
over
also, to
several
be
year period.
fair, we need to take LAUSD's comments that earlier commitments have potentially not been met. I'm fully aware of that, and we're going about this one hopefully in a different way with a lot of interim reporting to make sure we're making the investments necessary. If the investments are made and come to fruition at the end of 5 years, they'll be paying less than they pay right now. But again, it's incumbent on us to continue to ensure that that moves forward.
And might those details come to light in an MOU that does move forward, perhaps?
The MOU at present has been signed by both the school board and by the Board of Water and Power Commissioners.
Okay.
So we're in the how do we fund it implementation phase right now.
In terms of the no utility users tax question, what is a typical dollar amount commensurate with the real estate holdings of LAUSD compared to other
If I
property
recall
holders?
correctly, and legal can fix this if I'm wrong, the utility users tax for commercial is 10%. So it'd be
12 and a half.
Yeah, but schools, I think, have a exemption to 10, if I remember the language correctly.
I'm not.
So they're paying some, or they're not paying any?
Right now, they appear to not be paying any. We're double checking our records, but it appears that they had a pre-existing exemption prior to one of the either 218 or 26.
And so just something I wanted to highlight is in 2008, and we kind of talked about this earlier as well, but not in committee, it was a real sticker shock situation with the studios who their rates were pegged at the highest usage, on a summer day, for example. And it's my understanding that you've been meeting with some of the studios.
Yeah, just wanted to.
So there's a deeper.
We went through and met with a lot of large businesses. We checked specifically on the studio you mentioned, and we did do a bill estimate for them. We did that with much of the commercial community and went through and showed them what the impacts will be. Part of the people that came up and talked about that was, if they didn't have an energy manager, we would do that for them. And like I say, that studio, we did go. We gave them an estimate of what the impacts would be over 5 years. The rate impacts, I think, in 2008 were more demand-driven, which will hurt somebody like, like a studio that has a one-time spike, but we have to put the infrastructure in. This one's a little bit more balanced, and again, it's based on the cost to serve in this rate increase.
Okay, spread out, not just in one peak
Right.
period of the
Right.
day. And also, I get the whole sort of Prop 218 legal concern there, but also other industry, big hospitals, and such. Have you been meeting with the hospitals as well?
I don't remember meeting,
Has anyone-
I mean, we went through and did that again as part of large businesses. I know a number of them came through, and we looked at it, Kaiser, I can hear them say, and all the large hospitals. We did and did bill estimates for them as well as provided them with our bill determinants going forward so that they could do their own, evaluate the own impacts.
Okay.
If I
all
could
right.
fall back quickly, staff handed me a note that they were able to research the utility users tax savings for LAUSD, and it's $9 million annually.
$9 million annually? Okay. That's all for now. Thank you.
Yeah, really sort of big picture question. We're talking about 5 years, but why 5 years, not 7 years? Why not 3 years? How do we come to that as our window for this?
In part, it was an evolving direction. DWP has long had real challenges with the sporadic nature of rate making because we have a variety of long-term expensive projects that we need to necessarily fund. And so you get a rate increase in 1 year and then maybe nothing. The other comments I got a lot from the business community is they're always asking me for 3 to 5 year projections. They want to know what do they build into their budgets, how are they going to support making energy efficiency investments, and we've never been able to tell them that. Next, it's probably the issue associated with tooling up. It's a big machine. By the time you get the contracts in place, get everything resourced and staged, get all the permits you need, sometimes 16, 18 months can go by. So we get everything lined up and everybody moving, and then the tooling up stops because the predictability and the rate factor is gone. The other reason we ended up with 5 years is we have a lot more work necessarily to do, but we have a lot that we have quantified now. So I know all of the work that it is that we need to do and make investments on. I intentionally kept these rate increases lower because I am hopeful that moving forward, when we start to gain some clarity with existing litigation, when hopefully some of the reform proposals move through, that subsequently we can then far greater reform the rates process, because it is a Gordian knot at this point. But what I want to ensure is that we don't fall behind in these critical capital investments while we're doing that. So longer is better. There is no sweet spot. That's why we kind of built in the opener, so we could make sure that, are we still heading in the right direction, yes or no? But that's the reason we ended up where we are.
From our perspective in reviewing the rates, on the one hand, it's tough to forecast in the utility business beyond 3 years. On the other hand, there is the investment cycle in the utility business, which is a 5+ year investment cycle, combined with DWP's procurement challenges and the business need for regular rate reviews, but the political challenge of having those regular rate reviews. The mantra of the office from mid-2013 to mid-2015 was the importance of regular rate reviews. And the way to bridge that challenge was this combination of a 3-year period with a serious interim rate review, followed by the 2-year stub period, and it may be possible for DWP to submit another proposal during those last 2 years, or we can address those last 2 years by substantive changes in the rates in that period. And we've tried to capture that in this process. And so that's why we're supporting the 5-year approach.
That's what I was getting to. So you, as the ratepayer, are saying that's the right window as well.
Right, but it depends upon clear definition of that final 2 years.
And then, Ms. Edwards, one thing you mentioned just a moment ago, you said you were intentionally keeping it low, which we appreciate. Is there a risk in that, though, that we're going to go through this and be underfunded?
Potentially. I mean, strategically, I should have said we needed 15 and let you cut me to 5. Probably would have been a little easier.
But we appreciate rather being transparent and trying to work through that. I understand that as well. But
there is always that. My fear is that we'll continue to stand on the train tracks and argue about which way to jump. And I would rather get a small, consistent injection so that we can get going. This gap between 09 and 16 has been very destructive on the water side. And so I literally was just trying to get something moving. I characterize these as CPR rates, literally. I think, though, given the difficulty we have in the spend that's been mentioned to people by a couple of different people, I didn't want to collect money that I wasn't fairly confident that we could, in fact, spend. So that's basically why they are where they are. You always run that risk. I mean, we could get 5 large-scale storms or earthquakes. There are always issues that could create a situation where we need to come back at an emergency basis and said we've taken these huge hits and we need to recover. I mean, we're covered by FEMA and we have some self-insured, et cetera, but you can't ever eliminate that in this business.
You know, just on that point, before we get to you, Mr. O'Farrell, I mean, so I know that you've got that productivity factor at the tail end to inspire you all to bring a new rate action forward. But and we also know that you've asked for less, and we know that it's not enough. And there's a real Goldilocks thing going on here. It's what we can sort of handle today. How are you going to get the department, the water side of things, to be even more productive, to be able to be in a place where you say, now we need more? I mean, what?
I think a lot of the suggestions that you have heard, we have already been integrating from the RPA, from Navigant. We have deliberately strengthened the role of the CFO because of that kind of bifurcated system authority and the fact that the joint systems end up being starved. That was deliberate. We established a chief operating officer so that I have a tiebreaker, literally. So when the systems have different inputs, the joint just doesn't get caught in the middle and somehow defunded as a result of the efforts of both water and power. We have a successor memorandum of understanding coming up to be renegotiated, and one of the items I'd like to very much see and meet and confer is the contracting out process. How can it be expedited in a way, and how can we also meet our core staffing requirements? So a lot of these suggestions we have already taken to heart and are working in that direction.
Mr. O'Farrell.
I like your metaphors, and I like the one about sitting on the tracks, deciding on which side. Is that a metaphor for City Hall?
Go on.
Just curious.
Careful, Miss Edwards.
Yes, sir.
So I'm interested in the economic benefits of a rate increase and, helping to mitigate our extreme deficit in infrastructure while also providing job growth. And will you be addressing local hiring? Will you be addressing, employment, local employment?
All of the provisions that we have now in contracting out, all of those city policies come into play when we contract out. And so there is a large amount of questions that are asked from these firms that's weighed in the analysis. The local hiring they do, also the diversity and equity requirements are taken into consideration.
Local apprentice.
But you saw some of the numbers Jeff was talking about earlier. There's a substantial economic bang for the buck here in job availability, good job availability.
And I would just suggest, local apprenticeship programs at the extreme local level in neighborhoods that have been historically overlooked. Especially if we're talking about significant numbers of bodies that need to come aboard to do this kind of work over the next several years. It's an opportunity at the very micro level.
I also wanted to make the observation the utility and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers created a utility pre-craft training program that takes people from those neighborhoods and actually puts them into a training rotation and provides them the skills to ultimately pass civil service exams. And we use a lot of those people, and they are, I want to say the analysis showed us it's over 60% local disadvantaged neighborhoods. We couldn't make it LA specific because the law won't let you necessarily do that, but I think it's having its desired effect, and we want to grow that program substantially.
Okay, and then just lastly, Mr. Chair, in terms of some of the things we've been talking about in terms of the community gardens, the schools, the hospitals, the studios, well, I've been talking about a lot of them. Could this be reported back, since today isn't a decision day, in more sort of in a more documented way in terms of your interaction, your getting feedback from them, exactly what this, the Schedule F means and how it will. I would just love to see more details for my own reasons before,
We can do that. You want to do a write-up on Schedule F so it shows the
with the blessings of Chair.
Yeah, there's a lot of report backs here.
It's not a problem.
Those specifics would be very helpful so we know what we're really, deciding on.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield? I've got a couple more questions here. So I just want to see if I can understand this better. So the ordinance would allow the board to increase or decrease the base rate revenue target by up to 2% in response to the interim rate review report findings, the check-in, right? What would potentially enable the board to call for an increase in rates at this interim review? What is it that you would see that you would make a recommendation to the board to then increase the base rate by 2%?
It bears repeating that it's actually 2% of 35%, so it's 0.7%.
Right. So
But the
0.7 of it's so more than 0.5%.
Right.
Yeah. They said 0.6 earlier, but I'll take your 7. The point is, it's going to go up.
Right. What would cause it to go up is, as a good example, Marty's meeting all of his spend requirements. there's still a lot of infrastructure work that we need doing. But if he's reporting, if he's falling into his metrics, if there's more work to be done, that potentially could justify a request for that. A lot of this, that what will happen is that the RPA will review all of the assumptions, and the benefit to us is that it's an independent review. That's one of the big benefits of having a ratepayer advocate, is it's not something that the utility can control or drive. But it's a benefit to us because of the independent aspects.
And we've tried to make it not overly specific, because there are kinds of spending where they can be behind, but it's not systematically behind. For example, it might be a power plant retrofit where the big expensive item just hasn't been installed for some reason.
Or maybe we got money for remediation of a storage basin that we weren't expecting for another year, and we needed to match it. Those are the business decisions will be made transparent regarding the recommendation.
And to the same token, there might be some systematic failure, like they were just not able to ramp up an infrastructure replacement program of a certain type fast enough. That would be a reason to reduce it.
Dr. Bickle, so the board metric reporting, all of this, it seems to me places a very big responsibility on your office.
We understand.
Are you adequately staffed to be able to handle all of that? I mean, we were very, I think, optimistic in terms of the reporting timeframes, and I admire what it is that your capable staff of you plus two. It's just the three of you these days, is that right?
3 full-time.
3 full-time. How will you be able to, I mean, do you have the resources that you need?
We believe we're going to have to step up by 1 or 2 professionals full-time to deal with this.
Okay.
And one of those is in the existing budget. We may have to add one to the budget.
All right. I'm going to jump around here because there were some questions I didn't want to interrupt the presentations. Part of the proposed rate increase would fund infrastructure. The Navigant report notes that even with the rate increase, the department will still lag behind on some of these cycle times. As an example, main lines go down from, well, the rate increase will help us bring the cycle down to 185 years. That fails to meet the department's recommendation of a 120-year replacement cycle. How will the utility ever get caught up on those cycles?
I think in part, a lot of the constraint is related to this tooling up and the predictability. And as we satisfy those two, I think you'll see those times drop. It seemed irresponsible to ask for a rate increase for enough to remediate it down to a replacement cycle that was acceptable, knowing that under current conditions with some of the contract constraints and staffing constraints that we couldn't get there from here.
And I can appreciate sort of the honesty there. I think it's really refreshing that the department says we can't do it. How will you ever get to a place where we can? It won't be in this 5-year case, though, right?
No, I think it will be as a result, hopefully, of reform efforts that assist us in hiring, staffing correctly, assist us in expediting our procurement processes, allows us to reach the productivity enhancements so that we can hold rates down, but free up more money to invest in the infrastructure. I think we'll get there, but I can't also recommend something that just shocks customers right as we're coming out of a recession. It just...
Part of the rate case is to fund state mandates, and you all have sort of mentioned that repeatedly at presentations here in the field, as well as department set goals that are not required by the state. What programs included for funding in this rate proposal go above and beyond what the state is asking us or the federal government's asking us to do? And how much do you expect to actually spend in achieving those above and beyond?
I'm going to let Marty speak to the programs and the requirements, but largely on the water side, we have not locally set any goals that have not also been set by the state and other agencies. So we may be off 1% or 2% in what was established locally, but it was established with the state, and there are significant penalties, and our reductions are huge, our required reductions, and they may well adjust them to where we're required to reduce even more. So, Marty, why don't you speak to it?
Marcy's right. There's, as far as our, the conservation type mandates, what we've seen right now are temporary measures put by the State Water Resources Control Board. There may be some permanent changes coming from Department of Water Resources, but the city as a whole for many decades has had a conservation ethic, and so we've invested a lot in conservation because it makes us less reliant on these imported water resources and does ultimately save our customers money. So we have taken those kind of efforts ourselves as a city as part of our policy of being a green city and having both less demand on water and then also the transition to more local water resources. These are decisions we're making for our ultimate reliability. They're not mandated on us, but they're part of what we think is a better supply mix to guarantee our future. So these are decisions that we've taken upon ourselves that are not forced on us. On the water quality side, there's mandates that are included that are part of the projects that we're doing, as well as at Owens Lake.
It's completely prudent to make investments in things like recycling and stormwater. And you see the smaller amounts at the beginning of the rate request because these are large-scale projects. They're typically in design and permit mode for multiple years. But we have got to make investments in hardening our local water supply because in the instance that things do just continue to heat up, we need to be ahead of where other countries were. And so I don't think those are driven as much by mandates as much as they are by prudent policy.
And we watch this process carefully to make sure that as things go from demo to larger project stage, the cost benefit is there.
So you mentioned, things heating up, and this case is predicated on it being a normal water year. What will happen if the current drought continues and we do not have a normal water year during the proposed rate period? Will ratepayers pay more than what it is that you've reported here?
Ratepayers right now in the pass-throughs, water from Met, that's on a sliding scale. When Met charges us more, that's passed through to customers. What we're talking about in base rates is far more infrastructure, water quality requirements. They're needed to help offset a drought, but they won't automatically go up just because we are in a drought condition. It's going to cost the same to build a recycling plant or a stormwater capture or bioswale as it does, today. It's not drought sensitive as much.
Got it. Mr. Blumenfield, anything else?
No, just absorbing that last point. So essentially anything that we're doing now, if there is a bigger drought, customers may pay more because of the Met pass-through, but they're not necessarily going to pay more because of any action that we're taking right now in the base rate. Is that
that's correct
characterization?
Unless you miss the performance marks in the check-in and the board says that we're going to augment it by 0.6%.
Excellent.
Right?
Now, the overall price forecasts make assumptions about water returning to normal conditions. If instead water costs stay at the existing levels, there have been scenarios that I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head that considered that scenario.
And I assume you're going to ask, but we're going to get a report back on, because there was talk about that look-back procedure and whether there's a way to tighten it up in the next week or two.
So staff is working with the consultants and the ratepayer advocate to try to figure out if we can get some language that I can bring to the council, to the committee rather, they can bring to the committee that we would deem approvable. So they're working on it. And there are a lot of suggestions that I think that are very good here. For example, embedded in the Navigant report, doing the study on debt ratios. I mean, I think that is absolutely critical.
It's one we've already accepted. Every utility I've ever been a part of does a presentation of their policy body on debt, what the projections are, for the very reasons that it's brought up.
Right.
The tendency is to fall back on debt and not cash finance enough because you don't have high enough rates, but it's not a sustainable plan.
But there's a lot of recommendations here. So at some point, Mr. Blumenfield, I'd like to compare notes with the board to see what actions they're going to take. The IEA study, for example, also provided, high, medium, and low recommendations, and I don't think that they've taken any action on them yet. But I think once we get past this conversation, in short order, we'll be comparing notes because there's a lot in here that I think will help, irrespective of the conversation on governance. I mean, there's things that ought to be done and should be done, and hopefully will be done. So, I would like to just sort of congratulate Angelenos on their part on making sure that we're using water smarter. I mean, I think the good news here is that that we're fighting about a rate case and fighting to make sure that the ratepayer gets the most bang for his or her buck. But the even better news is that even with the anticipated population growth, Navigant pointed this out very astutely, forecasted in this rate period, even with that, our demand curve isn't getting much taller. And that's largely because Angelenos have heeded the call pre-drought and certainly now during this drought. Water is a very, very valuable thing, and a lot of people are doing their part. It's up to us, though, to do our part now. So thank you for your presentation. It was very helpful. You're going to speak, Mr. Blumenfield? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but I wanted to...
It was so dramatic. It was such a great end.
Well, I was going to thank you for doing... This has been a very thorough hearing, and I know it's part and parcel of a series of hearings.
It is.
And I appreciate the thoroughness in which you're going about this, and I also appreciate that DWP ratepayers advocates really done a lot of homework on this, and so we are getting into a level of depth on these questions. I think that is important and appropriate, and I wanted to just take a moment to reflect on that. I mean, as we ask all these questions, it should be pointed out that it's also, this is a great conversation that we're having, and I appreciate all of you who come to the table with the answers that you have, and the chair for leading us through this thorough discussion. I think this is how policy should be made. And I appreciate that. So
and thank you, Bob and Mr. O'Farrell, for being here for the conversations and for your questions. I mean, I'm excited about this committee because it's digging deep, to your point. So thank you very much. So we're going to continue the item, and we'll hear it at some future date to hopefully have a disposition on the request here. So, Mr. Prieto, this takes us to general public comment.
Yes, it does. Sir.
Very good. Jack Humphreyville, Kevin Modis, Rola Masri, and Ruth Sarnoff.
Drama, but I wanted to give you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Humphreyville. Mr. Humphreyville, go ahead.
Yeah. My name is Jack Humphreyville. I'm with the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council. On February 6th, the DWP Committee, which is affiliated with LANC, the Los Angeles Neighborhood Council Coalition, passed the following resolution. The DWP Oversight Committee calls on the City Council to follow the recommendation in the charter-mandated IEA survey to form a committee to examine the governance reforms of the department with the explicit task of reporting its findings and recommending a measure for the 2017 ballot. This governance committee should be involved in drafting any memorandums and information from the beginning and include at least 2 members of the neighborhood councils who are familiar with the operations and finances of the department. The DWP committee recommends there be a robust and transparent discussion and debate before any measure is placed on the ballot for voter approval or rejection. It seems to me that we've already gone way past that, so I gather the documents have already been drafted, which again is the lack of transparency. Thank you.
Kevin Modis, Rola Masri, and Ruth Sarnoff. Going once, going twice. Mr. Prieto, we're adjourned.
Yes, we are. Thank you.